Hey everyone, hope you're all doing great. Welcome back to the Anime Fictions 2.0. Today, we're diving into part 3 of What If Naruto's isolation made him a cold, strategic ninja. If you're enjoying these alternate timelines, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and check out the other videos on the channel. And of course, drop your thoughts in the comments. I always love hearing your ideas. Alright, enough talk, let's get into the story. Chapter 26, Lightless Struggle. It emerged from the roiling fog without warning, a great maw of a cave, built into the underside of a rocky cliff. There must have been something repelling the fog there, as a scattered system of smaller caves quickly came into view. At the moment, it appeared to be deserted and void of any activity. However, Naruto knew with certainty that just hours before, it had been crawling with sentries. True, there were signs here and there, scattered cigarette butts, and the whitened ashes of an old campfire. But moreover, he had seen it before in his mind's eye. By touching the feather of one of Mayu's bluebirds, Naruto had received an influx of its memories. Everything the bird had seen and heard since Naruto and his team had pretended to leave Wave Country was now a part of his own memory. It covered the events he had missed at the procession, including Jiraiya's clash with the three missing nin. That particular memory continued to show Mayu and Tazuna being taken away by Kakuzu. The final memory was of his teammate, who seemed to have somehow escaped, defending herself against two assailants in the fog-covered marshlands. Unfortunately, Sai's ink rats were unable to find Mayu in the vicinity. With time running out, their best hope was that she had been recaptured and was being held captive at Gado's hideout. Naruto felt a bead of sweat trickle down his brow. There was a simpler alternative to that possibility. Mayu had sent that bluebird to them for a reason. It had been a warning. But it seemed Mayu had not known Naruto as well as she must have thought, for he deliberately chose not to consider it. As Naruto and the others crouched behind a cluster of shrubs, he glanced at Rai, who was regarding the hideout in silence. In the place of his usual chatter, he had not spoken once since Sai's ink rats had returned. Naruto could only imagine what thoughts were going through his head. Several minutes passed, and in a surge of impatience, Rai rose up and made a move to step forward. Blocking the way with his arm, Naruto shook his head when two shadowy figures emerged from the cave's entrance. "They're out there, all right. I can smell the money," said one. "Ha!" The other raised his nose and sniffed the air. "I don't smell anything." It was Kakuzu and Haiden, and at the sight of the latter, Naruto stiffened in surprise. In the bird's memory, he had seen Jiraiya inflicting horrific burns on Haiden scarcely hours beforehand. Now, the only signs it had ever happened were faint scarring. Jiraiya appeared to be wondering the same thing. "Here I thought I'd finally rid the world of one of you crazies." Stepping past Naruto, he emerged from his hiding spot. "Where's the Jinchuriki?" Kakuzu asked, his pupilless eyes slowly searching the area. Jiraiya chuckled. "If you mean Naruto, he's on his way back home to Konoha." "That's unfortunate to hear. So if you'll just get out of my way, I'll take back the two you took from us, and be on my merry way. What do you think?" "Enough with the banter," Kakuzu growled. Naruto knew what was coming a split second before it happened. Kakuzu's hand shot out far past its reach, attached to its body by hundreds of thick black threads. It was how he had taken Mayu captive in the first place, at the procession. Jiraiya bit into his finger, and slammed his fist into the ground. "Kuchiyos no Jutsu, summoning technique." The ground shook. From a cloud of hissing smoke, something gigantic and red emerged, towering high above their heads. The sound of keening metal rang in the air as Shirakumo drew his weapon. Meanwhile, ink splattered across Sai's open scroll and an ink lion roared into existence. Before he left, Rai looked back at Naruto, and finally said, "It's in your hands." With that, he ran out to join the others. Haiden let out an elated laugh. "1, 2, 3 of you. Jashin-sama will be pleased with today's offering." It was time to get to work. Stepping back, Naruto concentrated and felt the chakra in his body begin to vibrate. Electricity began crackling around his feet. Masking his presence in the confusion of the starting battle, he shot across the open ground towards the mouth of the cave, and he was in. The plan they had put together was a simple one. While the others distracted the Akatsuki members, Naruto would look for Mayu and Tazuna. Once they were secured, their top priority was putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the missing nin. It wasn't an ideal plan, and the risks were high, but the others, with perhaps the exception of Sai, had all readily gotten on board. Whereas the outside of Gato's hideout had appeared to be completely abandoned, the inside was a different story. A large artificially excavated cavern teemed with several dozen armed men, and multiple tunnels led away to what was presumably the rest of the cave complex. Naruto began to sprint, his hands coming together to perform the sign, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, shadow clone technique. In a single identical motion, he and his clones drew their tanto. Hey, what did the first man to notice broke off into a strangled gurgle. His mind had been teeming with the chatter of 100 questions before, but it was silent now. The only thing on his mind was a series of twisted faces jeering down at an unconscious body. Sparks of electricity flashed. Spurts of bright blood splashed onto the cave walls, and twitching bodies fell to the ground. The armed men were genin level at best. They were no match for Naruto and his clones, who made short work of them. Soon, there was only one man left. He was a short man in an expensive suit, and was the shipping magnate locally feared as Gato. He had ruined the lives of many civilians, but none of that meant anything to Naruto. For him, Gato was yet another body in his way. The entire time, Gato had been backed up against the farthest corner of the cavern. Naruto turned towards him now, and he let out a yelp. He scrabbled backwards, knocking his own glasses askew. His squinted eyes fearfully watched Naruto advancing toward him. The smell of fresh urine stained the air. Wait. What do you want? If it's money, I have a lot of. Naruto slashed his tanto across the man's front, killing him. As the body crumpled to the floor, Naruto wiped the blade clean on its suit. The salt marshlands of the Land of Waves were infamous for their ever-changing terrain. More than one luckless traveler had gone astray in the combined elements of fog and mud, and their souls were said to wander the land in search of their lost bodies. The trail had gone cold for Kakashi's hounds. The only thing they'd been able to find was a single hair clip in the shape of a bluebird. Tazuna fell to his knees. That belongs to that young girl, doesn't it? Without responding, Kakashi lowered himself and stared at the ground. There were signs of a recent scuffle, with freshly turned dirt and broken reeds. He felt a glimmer of pride in his student. She had stood her ground against her opponents, whatever the outcome. What stood out to him most, however, was the sheen of ice covering the earth. While it seemed to be of ninjutsu origin, it was not one native to Wave Country. Clearly, outside forces were at work. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A flock of squawking marsh birds took off from a nearby shrub. Tensing, Kakashi straightened up. Was it an earthquake? Or a battle of immense proportions? It was difficult to be conclusive with the fog limiting his visibility. Still, he had to wonder what else was occurring in these marshlands. A massive sword spiraled through the air, cutting through the fog before burying itself blade first in the ground. In a flicker of movement, a bare-chested ninja appeared, resting on the handle of the sword. Kakashi's eyes narrowed. If he wasn't mistaken. If it isn't the missing nin from the hidden mist, Momochi Zabuza. I assume you're Kakashi of the Sharingan, said Zabuza. I'll have you hand over that old man. Tazuna turned pale. If that's the case, why did you all let me go in the first place? Let you go? The missing nin cocked his head. My orders were to recapture all escapees, dead or alive. How you escaped is none of my concern. Had Kakashi known he would be clashing against a ninja of Zabuza's caliber, he would never have brought a civilian with him. It was his careless mistake that put an innocent's life at risk, and to correct it, he knew that his usual self wouldn't be enough. Making up his mind, he raised his 8, revealing the swirling tomo in his left eye. Your opponent is me. Naruto and his clones each took a separate passageway leading away from the main cavern. The tunnels were man-made and lit by fluorescent lighting. They interconnected in a seemingly random pattern that reminded Naruto of the second test in the Chunin exam. His search was systematic. As he picked off any stragglers who had not been in the main cavern, he mentally crossed out the passageways he had already checked. This room was empty. This tunnel was a dead end. This room was also empty. And here was a dead end. And another. Naruto could feel his heart growing heavier and his focus giving way to a darker, lurking emotion. He was starting to wonder how high the tunnels ran, when with a jolt, one of his shadow clone's memories flooded his mind. Someone had sneaked up on it. It continued as one after the other, his clones were taken out. Right before his last clone disappeared, Naruto saw in its memories a blur of movement, and then he was standing alone in the tunnel. He heard it before he saw it, the subtle, almost indiscernible whistling of metal flying through air. Spinning around, Naruto brought up his tanto just in time to knock away what looked like several long needles senbon. They were followed by a kick that spiraled down at him, which he blocked with his forearm before thrusting his tanto forward. His assailant leaned back, allowing the blade to swing harmlessly above his chest. Then, using Naruto's arm as a springboard, he flipped backwards through the air. Taking in the ninja before him, Naruto realized two things in quick succession. One was that he wore the typical white mask of a hunter nin from the hidden mist. The second was his right hand, which was swollen and gray in color. It was poisoned. In a flash, he saw in his mind's eye one of Mayu's poisonous birds swooping down and pecking at a dark figure. He had been mentally preparing himself for a fight with one of the 3 S-ranked missing nin. He knew nothing about this ninja, or about what kind of circumstances had brought a Kiri hunter nin all the way to Gato's hideout. None of that mattered. Sending a stream of wind chakra down his blade, Naruto struck. As the chief toad of Mount Myaboku, while Gamabunta's giant size could dwarf even mountains, it had no bearing on his speed. With Jiraiya perched on his head, the chief's long tongue lashed out at a punishing pace, causing the earth to quake with every blow. Their opponent, however, was a freak even by Akatsuki's standards. Gamabunta's initial attack had ripped the man's body apart in two, only for the two halves to rejoin themselves using the same thick tendrils that had connected his arm to his body. Now, Kakuzu's entire body had darkened in color, and Gamabunta's attacks were no longer having as much of an effect. Evading another blow that sent tremors through the ground, Kakuzu suddenly threw himself into the air. Black tendrils from his arms bulleted straight towards Jiraiya, and before he could react, the threads wrapped themselves around his feet. The surface below him gave way, and he was hurled off the chief toad's head. Wasting no time, Kakuzu arched back and unleashed a massive blast of searing fire in his direction. Jiraiya didn't have to look back to know that the others, along with Haiden, were fighting behind him. If he didn't block the fireball, it was powerful enough to consume them all. It seemed that Kakuzu felt little sense of camaraderie for his fellow partner. Bunta! In response to his cry, Gamabunta's body swelled up. Just as the toad expelled a torrent of water towards the fireball, Jiraiya blew out, Futon, Gufu, Wind Release, Twister. A tornado twisted around the torrent, producing a cyclone that collided into the fireball. Even then, it wasn't strong enough to dispel it, splitting it instead into two walls of fire that veered off in different directions. One disappeared into the fog of the marshlands, and the other slammed into the mountainside. Kakuzu, you bastard! He heard Haiden howl. You almost hit me! A deadly rain of icicles slammed into the ground where Naruto had been standing a split second before. As the fluorescent lights flickered above them, dust rained down from the ceiling and spidery cracks appeared in the tunnel walls. The hunter nin was as small in stature as Naruto, and he had a suspicion that their ages weren't too far apart. However, he had never before met someone his age who could keep up with him in speed, let alone push him to this extent. Moreover, even though the hunter nin only had the use of his left hand, this did not seem to deter his ability to perform seals in the slightest. Nonetheless, judging from the sounds of battle coming from outside, Naruto did not have much more time to waste. He had to finish this quickly, before anyone else got hurt. The two exchanged several more blows, either giving way when Naruto's tanto glanced against the swollen hand of the hunter nin, who visibly jerked in pain. Seizing the chance, he directed a roundhouse kick at the other male, which made contact, the impact sending his body spinning through the air. Electricity surged painfully about his feet, and Naruto and 3 of his shadow clones shot forward, a tanto raised in each hand, ready to impale the hunter nin in from all directions. And then all of a sudden, coming in through the far end of the tunnel, a seething column of fire spiraled towards them, consuming everything in its path. There wasn't enough time. Naruto's momentum was carrying him forward, straight into the path of the fire. Did he know any that was powerful enough to counter it? Already, he could hear the roar and feel the heat on his face, but frantically, his mind raced through a dozen different things he could do. Hyaton, Hyogen Domu, Ice Release, Ice Rock Dome. The air around Naruto crackled, and everything around him was consumed in fire. Things were not looking good. Shirakumo was already dead. He had succumbed to a bizarre that connected Haiden's body to his. The Jonin's body lay crumpled on the ground, blood still seeping from the hole in his chest. Panting, Rai flipped back and warily regarded the missing Nin, who currently wore an expression of utter ecstasy. He knew it, but Haiden was strong. Overwhelmingly strong. He had grown stronger since their time in Yugakure. Even Sai seemed to understand the trouble they were in. He hadn't cracked a single insult since the battle had begun. "Isn't it about time you made yourself useful?" Sai panted. "Well, it had been a good run." "I don't see you doing anything either," Rai snapped back. Haiden kissed an amulet that hung around his neck and his black and white skin returned to its original color. Rai shot a look back up at Gado's hideout, but it was quiet. He had to assume Naruto was still searching for Mayu and Tazuna. In the meantime, it was their job to keep Haiden busy. Ink birds began to dive in kamikaze style, exploding around Haiden. Rai drew his kunai blades from his back, the chains connecting the dual blades clanking dully. That day in Yugakure, Rai had been knocked out before he could do anything. Naruto had gotten most of the glory then, as he usually did, and Rai had sworn to himself that he would get his revenge. Haiden had grown stronger, but he hadn't spent the past few years idly either. The fireball that had consumed the tunnel sputtered away into nothing, and Naruto stared up at the dome of ice that protected both him and the hunter Nin. If he wasn't mistaken, it had just saved his life. But why? As he watched, the dome disappeared, and Naruto lowered his gaze. The hunter Nin, panting in exertion, stood well within his reach. The fireball had been the final blow. The tunnel ceiling had collapsed in, and amidst the rubble, they now stood exposed to the outside air. The sun had set while he was inside the hideout, and he found himself awash in the glow of moonlight. The shouts of battle echoed in the distance. The earth rumbled from the movements of Jiraiya's toad summon. For the first time, the hunter Nin spoke. "The girl, was she one of yours?" His voice was higher than Naruto had expected. "She did that to your hand." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Where is she?" The hunter Nin didn't respond, and in his silence, Naruto knew. In that moment, as though he had been doused in ice-cold water, everything became clear. Powering his feet with chakra, he thrust his tanto forward. The hunter Nin jerked back in surprise a fraction too late. The blade cleaved straight through his swollen arm. Yellow pus and dark blood burst out as the severed limb fell away, splattering Naruto's face. Staggering back, the hunter Nin let out a piercing scream, and as though heeding his call, a blast of icy air began emanating from his body. His scream morphed into the sound of crackling frost, and before he knew it, Naruto found himself trapped in another dome. This time, it was made out of mirrored ice. The sky grew thick with gray clouds and the moonlight faded. It began to snow. Though Zabuza had disappeared into the mist, Kakashi could sense the thick bloodthirst churning in the vicinity. He knew what was coming. Silent killing, it was one of the most feared assassination techniques. He didn't fear for his own life, however. The greater risk was to Tazuna. Though the older man's composure up to this point was remarkable, his fear was becoming increasingly tangible. "Don't worry, Tazuna-san," said Kakashi, making a reassuring smile. "You're in my charge now. I won't let you die." It was then that Zabuza chose to strike. "I wonder about that." Seemingly out of nowhere, the missing Nin materialized behind Tazuna, raising his sword to deliver the finishing blow, but Kakashi had been waiting. His Sharingan glowing, he turned around and plunged his kunai straight into the man's chest. It was not blood but water that dripped down the handle and fell to the ground. Another Zabuza emerged from the mist behind Kakashi, and the water clone he had struck instead melted away. Letting out a roar, Zabuza swung his sword in a formidable arc, cleaving Kakashi's body cleanly in two. For a moment, his eyes gleamed with triumph, which then turned into confusion, as the Jonin's body also melted away into water. "Don't move." Kakashi held a kunai to the missing Nin's neck, his Sharingan fixed on his target. "It's over." And yet, Zabuza looked far from defeated. "Clever, you used your Sharingan to mimic my hiding and miss technique. But if you think that's enough, you're sorely mistaken." Once more, another Zabuza materialized behind them. Kakashi stiffened in alarm as the clone he'd been holding hostage dissipated. It had been a trick within a trick before raising his steel-plated gloves up just in time to block the coming blow. They stood at a standstill, sword grinding against steel. Their bodies shook from the tremendous force being put in on both ends, and then they burst apart, each leaping away from the other. As Kakashi landed, he felt something cold and wet land on the tip of his nose. It took him a second to process what it was. Snow? For some reason, the snow seemed to give Zabuza pause. When he moved again, he was visibly shaken, and Kakashi seized the opportunity. As the missing Nin raised a hand into the air to start his technique, Kakashi mirrored his motion. Before the other could react, the Jonin's hands blurred, finishing the he had been about to start. Suetun, Daibakufu no Jutsu, Water Style, Great Waterfall Technique. Zabuza reeled back in shock. A muddy vortex of water rose up and claimed him. The earlier fight against Shirakumo must have drained Haiden more than Rai had expected, for the missing Nin's movements seemed sluggish. As Sai provided backup, they eventually managed to corner the missing Nin. With a lunge, Rai drove his kunai blade into Haiden's back, twisting it deep into his heart. Any ordinary person would have been long dead by now, but Haiden looked irritated instead. "I've told you, it's useless." Reaching back, he grabbed Rai and forcefully hurled him into the air. Flying backwards, the chain connecting Rai's blades clinked in the wind, and suddenly, it gave him an idea. It all happened in an instant. Even as Sai's ink snakes swarmed him, Haiden lobbed his scythe after Rai. It whistled through the air, its 3 blades gleaming. He had a choice to make, and he made it. Even as the scythe plunged into his own chest, Rai used his remaining strength to throw his remaining kunai blade back at Haiden. Momentarily immobilized, Haiden watched the chains wrap tightly around his body, the blades still lodged in his back acting as an anchor. Finally, the chains ran out and the swinging kunai blade sliced straight through Haiden's neck, decapitating him. "Let's see you recover from that." Rai grinned and his body hit the ground. By the time the water released Zabuza, slamming him against the ground and receding from around his body, the missing Nin was spent. Kakashi held a kunai to his neck and at last, Zabuza bowed his head in defeat. "It's over," Kakashi said coldly. "Now tell me, where are my students?" Zabuza's face twisted. He opened his mouth. 2 kunai slammed into his neck, hitting his vital points in a splash of blood. The man didn't stand a chance. He was dead before Kakashi could even grasp what was going on. Alarmed, he immediately turned in the direction the kunai had come from. He had not noticed the presence of anyone else, and yet there, in the creeping fog, a figure in an orange mask stared down at Kakashi. "Who the hell is that?" The Hunter Nin's reflection surrounded Naruto on all sides, the white masks looming down at him. Every reflection gripped the bloody stump of its arm and gritted out in an echo, "You can't escape not from my mirrors." Once more, Naruto heard the shrill sound of metal as dozens of needles filled the air. This time, there were too many to counter. Even as he batted away the majority with his tanto, several broke through his guard, cutting through his cheeks and legs. It was curious how, despite the grim situation, Naruto didn't feel the slightest trace of fear. He hadn't realized it, but his mind had been growing dull with doubt like an unsharpened blade, ever since he had left Konoha for Wave Country. All that was gone now. There was a razor sharpness in its place, and he knew exactly what to do next. Opening his guard, Naruto brought his hands together to form a seal. Even as a dozen needles pierced his newly exposed arms, with a cloud of smoke, several shadow clones appeared and immediately began to guard him. Metal met metal in the background. Ignoring the pain, Naruto focused on the churning ball of chakra forming in the palm of his hand. He had thought that combining both shape and nature transformation was an impossible task, like trying to look in 2 different directions at once. In the new clarity of his mind, he realized now that his mistake had been in focusing too much on a single direction. He didn't have to look in 2 directions at the same time, he only had to widen his perspective. The tightly focused ball in his hand spun wildly. Strong gusts of wind began to spiral out. Stepping forward, Naruto slammed his Rasengan into the mirrors, and with an ear-splitting sound, they shattered into thousands of ice particles. When the air had cleared, the Hunter Nin lay unconscious on the ground. For a moment, Naruto held the blade of his tanto against the other ninja's neck, thinking. Then, he let his blade drop away. Leaving the hunter Nin's body behind, Naruto began to make his way down to the cliff's base. He could acknowledge it now, either Mayu nor Tazuna were here. It was time to come to terms with the fact that, despite their best efforts, they were going to come out of this empty-handed. The first thing Naruto saw was Shirakumo's body, still warm to the touch. He checked its pulse, and reaching a negative, stood up. And then he saw it. There, illuminated in the moonlight, was another body. His heart pounding in his ears, Naruto felt the last of the air in his lungs leave in a slow exhale. Rai! At the sound of Naruto's voice, Rai stirred. He had been fighting to stay awake long enough to wait for him. There was something heavy weighing him down, and he struggled to lift his head. The clouds must have covered the moon again, for everything was dark. Mayu? He asked. Did you find her? There was a pause. I found her. She's right here. Intense relief flooded what Rai could still feel of his limbs. Tears welling up in his eyes, he let his head fall back. He knew he had lost too much blood. The darkness was coming for him. He had no regrets. He had fulfilled his duty to his village. He had gotten his revenge for Yugakure. And with Naruto around, Mayu would be safe. He had no regrets. No, that wasn't exactly right. He did have one regret left. I wish I could have seen Kakashi-sensei's face at least once. Rai let out a rattling laugh, and with that, he died. Chapter 27, The Roar in a Rain of Tears. Another moonlit night swept across the tiled rooftops of Konoha. As always, the village blissfully slumbered under the ever-watchful eye of the ANBU. It was also another late night for the Hokage, who was finishing up the day's paperwork. Just as he had scrawled his signature across a trade permit, he paused his pen. He could sense someone heading straight for his office. A moment later, a red-haired ninja using the body flicker technique appeared in the space before him. From the disheveled appearance and the smell, Naruto looked as though he hadn't bathed in days. More importantly, he was alone, when Hiruzen had received a messenger bird from Kakashi informing him that the whole team was on their way back. Naruto, where's the rest of your team? Asked Hiruzen. I'm a clone, said Naruto. I wanted to know why you sent that missive to Team Shirakumo telling us to stay in Wave Country. Alarms started going off in Hiruzen's head. If such a missive was sent out, it was not under my authority. Naruto, what is going on? The hard look in Naruto's eyes told Hiruzen that this had only confirmed the boy's suspicions. I'm guessing someone intercepted my messenger birds. They must have also forged your seal on a fake missive to keep our teams in Wave Country. I tried getting here as fast as I could, but I had to conserve chakra. I'm going to report back. The clone broke off. His eyes widening, he fell to his knees. In a cloud of smoke, he disappeared. Slowly, Naruto rose to his feet. Everything was very still. And larger, as though magnified. Or was it his senses instead? Taking in his surroundings, he surmised in an instant what had happened. While Naruto had fought the hunter Nin, Shirakumo had died trying to take down Haiden, and to finish the job, Rai had paid with his life. Further out, Naruto could see yet another body sigh? But his chest alone moved up and down, breathing. Kakuzu, you bastard, where are you? Come back here and bring me my body. It was Haiden's head, sitting at least a dozen yards away from its body. Impossibly, Haiden seemed to have survived even a beheading. The earth shook and in a daze, Naruto looked up. Snow drifted serenely down from the sky as a raging battle played out in the background. Jiraiya faced off against Kakuzu, and what appeared to be 4 black humanoid masses. It didn't seem right to Naruto. His teammates were no longer here. And yet the world continued to move. Some of the snow that had been falling had melted, and the ground shimmered with water. Naruto caught a glimpse of his reflection, crowning a blank face. His hair burned like fire and his whisker marks stood out starkly. Droplets of blood rolled off his chin and landed in the water, dyeing it red, and his reflection disappeared. This quiet, burning sensation, he had never felt like this before. No, that wasn't quite right. He had felt it once before. He could remember now. It had happened years ago, and the memory of it had been forcibly taken from him. But it was all coming back. Everything was fuzzy and dim. He could hear the sound of running water. The back of his head throbbed, where they had struck him. He wondered where his captors were taking him. He wished he had remembered to wear his scarf to cover his face. Maybe all this wouldn't have been happening then. There was someone still fighting his captors. He didn't know who it was. They were strong, and several of his captors groaned and fell to the ground. Eventually, however, his captors managed to put a sword through their chest. The person collapsed, and their mask fell off. With a jolt, he saw the face of the woman who slammed bowls of rice down on his table every day. She had never had a kind word for him before, and yet she had fought for him. Now she is gone. Something inside him snapped. Everything he had ever felt in his short life came together into a single, black emotion. It seethed and roiled. It wanted a release. His vision was turning red. A guttural sound filled the tunnel, and he soon realized it was coming from him. The next thing he heard was the sounds of his captors screaming. Before long, bodies floated face down at his feet in a river of blood. Back in the present, Naruto opened his eyes. An immense metal gate loomed before him. Something huge and dark lurked behind it. A single seal on the gate doors blocked its escape. He knew it was the only thing preventing the demon it held captive from devouring him. "So you've finally come to me of your own will," a deep voice filled his head. "What changed?" "There's nothing holding me back anymore," said Naruto. The demon roared in laughter. "You finally understand." A wave of dark, tainted chakra surged out from between the bars of the demon's cage and entered Naruto. He felt his depleted chakra reserves fill up to the brim, and then some more, as it overflowed and enveloped his entire body. He had never felt so much chakra before. It almost felt as though it was eating away at his own body. Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. He had carried its burden in ignorance for many years, and upon his revelation, tried to deny it. Though he hadn't wanted to admit it, he had been afraid of the consequences. But all that was gone. There was nothing he had left to lose. Now, he decided, it was time to embrace it. "Forget about me," Tazuna yelled. "Just go." Kakashi hesitated. More than anything, he wanted to investigate the source of the ground tremors. He could feel it in his gut that it was linked to his team's disappearance. But after all that he'd done to defend the old bridge builder from Zabuza, he couldn't leave him there by himself. Nor did it seem like a good idea to bring him along. After a moment's thought, Kakashi summoned back his Nikken pack. "Take him to safety," he instructed his hounds. In agitation, Tazuna bobbed his head. "I'll be fine. Your students need you." He nodded. With a final look back at Zabuza's still body, he left. As Kakashi ran alone through the fog, the ghostly image of the masked man who had killed Zabuza floated into his mind. He had disappeared before Kakashi could give chase, leaving behind only questions. The strange thing was, even though it was his first time seeing the man, he had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be their last. The marshlands passed quickly. As the air grew colder, the tremors grew more pronounced. He knew that he was drawing close. He could only pray that he wasn't too late. Kakuzu couldn't remember the last time he'd had such a bad day, and he had lived a long life. It didn't rank quite as high as the day he'd returned to his village following his failed assassination attempt on the first Hokage. Nothing ever would, but it was up there. It didn't help that once again, he was battling for his life against the Leaf Nin. It rankled that he was even here. While Jiraiya's head would have made an excellent trophy, Kakuzu would have preferred to fight him on a stage of his own choosing. No, the only reason he was here at all was because of the leader's orders. Don't lay a hand on the Jinchuriki. Capture the Jinchuriki's teammates. Kill everyone but the Jinchuriki. Easier said than done, when the Jinchuriki kept popping up in his vicinity, and when everyone included one of the Sannin. Kakuzu knew that the Ninetales had to be extracted last, so why go after its Jinchuriki at all at this time? What was the point? Nonetheless, he carried out his orders without question, even while that bastard Haiden was talking his ear off with his complaining. He trusted that the leader always knew what he was doing. Still, he couldn't shake off the sense that there was someone else pulling the strings, pushing around Kakuzu as a pawn in their game. Suddenly, Kakuzu was yanked out of his thoughts when the sage froze, halting his assault. And then Kakuzu felt it too. A wave of vile chakra blasted into the air. It was powerful enough that the force of it alone blew away the fog in their vicinity. Kakuzu immediately spotted the source. It was the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, surrounded in a translucent shroud that he recognized as the tailed beast's chakra. 4 tails, made out of the same vile chakra, churned wildly at his back. The 7 tails Jinchuriki they had captured had resorted to using this power too, before they overpowered her. With a stab of annoyance, he wondered whether Haiden had violated the leader's orders and attacked the Jinchuriki. Kakuzu's battle against Jiraiya had not afforded him many chances to check in on how his idiot partner was doing. Then, he saw the headless body. "Oi, Kakuzu!" the head howled. As he watched, 2 of the Jinchuriki's chakra tails picked up the body and ripped it apart with ease. The remaining tails picked up the screaming head and slammed it down with a force that split the ground in 2. Well, there goes another partner. Powerful gales of wind accompanied every swing of the beast's tails. The sheer force of its chakra warmed the atmosphere, causing the snow to melt into a shower of rain. To Jiraiya, its overwhelming chakra seemed to be the very embodiment of nature. It was hard to believe this demon was Naruto. No, he mentally corrected himself. This was the Nine Tails emerging from Naruto. Somehow, the seal had weakened enough for it to physically manifest itself. The beast turned its hate-filled gaze on Gamabunta. Its tails whipped through the air toward them and Gamabunta braced himself, ready to return the blow when the tails arched around them and slammed instead into Kakuzu. The missing Nin, who had been on the verge of striking an unsuspecting Jiraiya, bulleted down through the rain and crashed into the wet ground. Torrents of mud flew in every direction as his body continued to bowl through the earth, leaving behind a long, uninterrupted strip in his wake. Stunned, Jiraiya watched the beast let out a deafening howl that shook the skies. The moment Kakashi felt the Nine Tails chakra surge through the marshland and blow away the fog, he braced himself for the worst. And yet nothing could have prepared him for the scene of carnage that met his arrival. At the base of a cliff, bodies with all too familiar faces littered the muddy ground. It was an image that brought back painful memories of the Third World War. His colleague and fellow veteran, Shirakumo. A crater with a body mangled beyond recognition. And Rai. His student. His eyes were still open, staring glassily up at the gray sky. The day he had first met his genin team flashed in his mind. "You can tell me your likes, dislikes, hobbies, your dreams." When nobody answered, Kakashi sighed and gestured towards a genin with a scar running down his face. "How about you go first?" The boy scowled. "The name's Hagain Rai. My goal is to become the best weapons specialist in Konoha. And I hate being ordered around." The sound of rain filled his ears. As he watched the droplets hit the boy's still face, Kakashi's heart grew heavy. It seemed like it was only yesterday, when his team had passed the bell test. The air crackled. A blood-red ball of chakra shot through the sky and slammed into the cliff with a thunderous explosion. Breaking off from the point of impact, giant boulders began sliding down, crashing into the ground. Gamayuden, Toad Oil Bomb. A mass of murky oil burst through the air, coating the rampaging beast. Jiraiya followed by directing his spiky white hair to wrap itself tightly around the beast, dragging it down to the ground. For a moment it seemed to work, and then with another roaring surge of chakra, it burst out of its bindings. Infuriated, the beast switched its attention from Jiraiya, who was forced to dodge out of the way. Kakuzu seemed to have had enough, taking this as a window of opportunity to escape. Jiraiya saw out of the corner of his eye as the hulking missing Nin leaped backwards and flickered away in a puff of smoke. "Jiraiya-sama!" shouted a voice. A familiar silver-haired ninja appeared, gently setting down 3 bodies beside a shrub. Jiraiya did a double take. "Is that you, Kakashi? Did Sarutobi-sensei send you?" Kakashi stood, his infamous Sharingan glowing in his left eye. "It's a long story." It was as though he was viewing everything from a distance through a red haze. He was in control of his body, and at the same time, he was watching his own body move. Haiden was dead, or at least crushed beyond repair, and Kakuzu seemed to have disappeared. His enemies were gone and Naruto knew he had already achieved his objective. And yet, it wasn't enough. There was a void deep in his chest that he didn't know how to fill. He could feel his body thrashing about, itching with the desire to be put into action. To go somewhere anywhere and not come back. Only, there was nowhere to go. He had longed to leave Wave Country and return to Konoha. But there was nothing for him there anymore. The marshlands stretched out into infinity behind him, while to his front, past the edge of the cliff, he could see a dark sheet of water. It was the sea, disappearing into the horizon. He wondered what lay beyond there. Pushing back, he readied himself to propel his body forward and… "Naruto!" a faraway voice shouted. It took a moment to process that it was his name being called. Naruto blinked, and all of a sudden, Kakashi stood beside him in his mind. His left eye glowed red. He had activated the Sharingan. Naruto took an involuntary step back. He had seen Kakashi use it sparingly in battle, but never before like this. The Ninetales let out a growl. Yuyuri, not an Uchiha. Ignoring the beast, Kakashi turned towards Naruto. "What's going on here? Where's Mayu?" Naruto didn't respond, and the Jonin's face turned solemn. "Come back, Naruto. This isn't the answer." "What would you know, sensei?" The part of Naruto that was still rational knew it wasn't Kakashi's fault. But bitter words were coming out of his mouth, like vomit, and he couldn't hold them back. "It's not like you were here when everyone died." Kakashi drew a sharp breath. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I came as quickly as I could." For some reason, the apology only made him angrier. "It doesn't matter anymore. I've failed my mission, my team is gone. There's nothing for me to care about anymore. Do you know how that feels?" "I do," said Kakashi. Taken aback despite himself, Naruto stopped. The Jonin's gaze, while trained on Naruto, seemed to be focused on something far away. "I also lost my team in the World War. Obito and Rin, they're gone because of my failures." "Ignore him," the Ninetales snarled. "He's only trying to confuse you." It would have been all too easy to do as the Ninetales said. It was so tempting that Naruto almost gave into it. But as he considered Kakashi's words, he could feel his anger seeping away. And in its place, he started to remember things. He thought of his first day at the academy, when he had felt like the only person in the world. He thought of the day he was first killed as a genin, and fell asleep to the rocking of the wagon. He thought of his birthday, in which Mayu baked a too-sweet cake and Kakashi presented him with a tanto. He thought of the Chunin exams, looking up at a dark ceiling and Rai asking if he was awake. He thought of Mayu calling down to him in his fight against Fu. He thought of their team, sitting down at Ichiraku's after a hard mission and ordering extra garlic with their ramen. At the time, these moments had not seemed so precious to him. Only now that they were gone, did he understand. Something in his chest throbbed, and Naruto clutched it. He could feel the void there, but he couldn't reach it. "How do you deal with it, sensei?" "You fool!" howled the Ninetales. Kakashi inclined his head. "We endure." The beast that had been bristling suddenly seemed to shrivel up before his eyes. Its baleful eyes dimmed, it shrank in size, and finally, as the red demon shroud smoldered away into nothing, Jiraiya jumped forward to catch Naruto's body in midair. The body, as scratched and beaten up as it was, seemed almost lifeless. However, Jiraiya could feel his heart beating in a steady rhythm, and for that, he was thankful. As he walked back, he saw Kakashi kneel and close the eyes of the Chunin boy. Standing up, the Jonin bowed his head in prayer. Jiraiya somberly looked down at Naruto's still face, and then around at their surroundings. At some point in the night, the rain had stopped. The sun was rising, bleaching the sky in its vivid colors. It was a new day. Kakuzu didn't call it running away. He called it a tactical retreat. The Sannin had been in enough trouble on his own. With the Jinchuriki rampaging and then the copy ninjas showing up to the battle, he had made the executive decision that it was high time he left the country sans his irritating partner. He had finally reached the forest, when without warning, he sensed someone following him. "Kakuzu-san! Kakuzu-san!" It was a high-pitched voice that Kakuzu despised from the bottom of his many hearts. Turning back, sure enough, he saw an orange mask gaining on him. "What is it?" he grunted. "You sure hightailed it out of there," said Toby in a cheery voice. "If you were worth the slightest bit of money, I'd kill you." "That doesn't sound likely. Unless the leader makes me your next partner." Toby began to sound worried. That'd be dangerous, considering how quickly you go through them. I'd be doing the world a favor, getting rid of you. Kakuzu paused, fully taking in Toby's appearance. He was carrying something large on his back, and suddenly, he wondered what the man he regarded as the leader's big mistake was even doing there. Toby must have noticed him watching. It was difficult to tell through the mask, but to Kakuzu, it almost seemed as though he was smiling. Don't worry. This isn't anything you need to concern yourself about. Somehow, the Hokage had already gotten wind of the fiasco in Wave Country. By the time Kakashi and the others returned to the safe house, there were several ANBU ops scouting the perimeter. With the help of the reinforcements from Konoha, the matter was quickly wrapped up. The Wave Country's daimyo and his children were returned to their vassals. Shirakumo's genin team was informed of his passing. A sallow-looking woman was transported back to the village for further interrogation. A search party was sent out to retrieve Mayu's body, only to return empty-handed. Finally, the rest returned home. The day after their return, a funeral service was held. Half the village turned up, the procession led by Mayu and Rai's older brothers and Shirakumo's grieving daughter. Knowing their history, Kakashi had half expected Izumo to blame Naruto, but with tears streaming freely down his face, the Chunin seemed lost in his own inner conflict. Shirakumo's genin team was there, along with many of the other genins. At the mention of Rai's name in the Hokage's funeral address, a young kunoichi with hair rolled up into buns burst into tears. And then it was over. That day, a somber pallor seemed to have been temporarily cast over the village. Shutters were drawn, and lights were dimmed. As the skies grew dark, everyone returned to their homes, turning in early for the night. All except for one. From a distance, Kakashi watched Naruto stand before the memorial stone, to which 3 names had been newly added. The next day, Jiraiya approached Kakashi with a proposal to take Naruto along on a journey. Once given the choice, Naruto thought over it for a few minutes, before giving his answer. Somewhere hidden deep in the depths of Konoha, the members of the underground organization Root gathered before their leader, Danzo. Most people were not even aware of its existence. Under the orders of the third Hokage, Root had officially disbanded following the downfall of the Uchiha clan. However, to this day, the organization continued to operate in secret as the unseen force supporting the Great Tree of Konoha. One of its members kneeled before Danzo now, having finished his report. He had been sent to Wave Country as part of the Jinchuriki's team to keep an eye on his activity. However, his report was incomplete. The operative had been knocked unconscious halfway through the final battle. The only other witnesses present for the remainder of the battle, Jiraiya and Kakashi, were staunchly loyal to Hiruzen, leaving Danzo to grasp in the dark as to what had occurred. It was an unfortunate turn of events, especially given the operative's previously spotless track record. It was his first failure. Perhaps that was the reason why, while giving his report, the operative seemed uncharacteristically distracted. After dismissing the operative, Danzo stood by himself in the darkness, thinking. Whatever had happened in Wave Country, it made little difference in the end. No matter what Hiruzen said, he was not stupid enough to trust the Jinchuriki to stay loyal to the Leaf. He had heard reports that the Jinchuriki would soon be leaving the village again for an extended period of time, and it was clear to Danzo that Hiruzen was growing soft in his old age. As he considered his next move, Danzo regarded his right arm with a baleful glare. He would bide his time for now. But sooner or later, the Ninetales' power would be his. On the morning of their departure, just as they reached the gate, Naruto stopped. He turned around and gazed up at the stone faces of the Hokage monument, before closing his eyes. As the sun's glow warmed his face, he could hear the other villagers streaming past him, the chatter of their daily life resounding in his ears. Market prices have gone up lately. Going to meet my uncle in Tea Country. A cake for her birthday. His eyes opened. Turning back around, he saw Jiraiya waiting for him. Naruto took a step forward. And another. And then, walking through the gates, he left Konoha behind. Chapter 28, Emergence of Talents. It was raining in Amigekure, the hidden rain, but that was nothing new. Neon signs flickered, glowing sullenly in the dark of the night. Numerous metal pipes scaled a sea of rusty towers that groaned under their own weight. Copper wires, dangling from tower to tower, swayed haphazardly in the wind. To the west, the tallest tower in Amigakure spiraled above the surrounding area. Other than its height, it was easily made distinguishable by the 4 humanoid faces that protruded from each side of the tower. The village's dead were all brought to this tower for processing. It was also the rumored dwelling of their savior, Lord Pain. Ever since the lady had brought news of their lord's victory over Hanzo to the village, the hard look in everyone's eyes had changed. Ajisai could still remember the first time she saw the lady appear before the village people. With her beautiful stoic face and her wings that spanned the length of the sky, she looked every bit the role of an angel sent from the heavens. It was so overwhelming, Ajisai cried. News quickly spread of Lord Pain after that. Following the deaths of Hanzo and the members of his faction, the civil war they had thought would never end came to a close. Now, the entire village was united under Lord Pain's mission of peace and hope. Lady Angel warned them that the hidden villages of the 5 great nations would not react so favorably to Hanzo's death, and so, they continued to perpetuate the notion that their civil war was still ongoing. Months had passed since then, and none of the other villages seemed to have noticed. Nobody, Ajisai included, was too surprised. Given the other nations' history of waging battle in Rain territory, and causing further havoc for their village, she didn't expect them to care about anything other than themselves. It was raining, as always, when Lady Angel appeared before Ajisai and the other genin. She descended without warning, her paper wings keeping her afloat. As she turned her pale, serene face towards them, Ajisai froze, her mind reeling at suddenly coming face to face with her idol. Then, coming to her senses, she immediately prostrated herself on the ground. The Hidden Leaf has invited the Hidden Rain to participate in their Chunin selection exams this year. Your teams will go, in the pretense of participating. The other villages must continue to believe that Hanzo of the Salamander rules the Hidden Rain. Yes, Tenchi-sama, they spoke in unison. Team Ajisai, said the lady, and Ajisai found her mind once again going into overdrive at the revelation that the lady knew her name. I have a special mission for you. Take advantage of the Chunin exams to find a Jinchuriki. A Jinchuriki? Ajisai cautiously ventured, raising her head. Swearin. The lady looked at one of her teammates. Use your sensory perception skills and look for a shinobi who harbors an enormous amount of chakra. Is that what a Jinchuriki is? Asked Swearin. Without answering his question, the lady continued, even if you don't find a Jinchuriki, bring back intel of any extraordinary shinobi from other villages. She heard the sound of flapping wings and then the lady was gone. The other genin began to murmur in awe amongst themselves. Ajisai shared a nod with Swearin, before turning to her third teammate. He was a relative newcomer to their village. He had a pretty face but didn't talk much, speaking only when necessary. Ajisai did not know much about him beyond that he was yet another war refugee and that he was incredibly strong. With him by their side, Ajisai had little doubt that they would be able to carry out the lady's mission to the finish. When she saw his face, however, she found herself taken aback. The usual calm demeanor was gone. Instead, a blazing look of fury burned in his eyes, and she could see his visible hand clenched so hard, it shook. It wouldn't be the first time that a war refugee in their village had suffered at the hands of the Hidden Leaf. Sympathy welling up in her heart, Ajisai wondered whether her teammate was the same. For as long as Gaara could remember, the voice had always been there, whispering in his head. When he was younger, while he was aware of the voice's presence, he did not understand it. It was purely a constant stream of noise. Its volume and tone tended to vary by the day, and it was relentless. He did not understand it, but it kept him up at nights when the rest of the village had gone to sleep and the sand of the desert shimmered like water in the moonlight. It was on the night of a full moon that Gaara fell to his knees before the dying body of his uncle, and felt its blood boil for the first time. The sensation racked the entire length of his body, and it was unbearable. The sand that had always served as his protection erupted around him, and everything that had been building up inside exploded into mindless, unadulterated rage. By the time the sand settled down, he knew that it was not just a voice. It was the voice of the monster inside of him, and it told him he was alone in the world. Over the years, Gaara's father the Kazekage tried to assassinate him 5 more times, but he survived and persisted. Shikaku continued to torment him, threatening to take over his body the moment he let down his guard, but while Gaara no longer slept, he continued to fight. His father hated him. His siblings dreaded him. His village feared him. Yet Gaara alone loved himself. And so he lived. When he grew older, he was placed in a 3-man team with his siblings. However, while he was initially signed up to participate in the Chunin exams held at their village, upon receiving the list of registered genin from the other villages, his father withdrew Gaara from the exam. With Kankuro's promotion to the rank of Chunin, Gaara's current team consisted of his sister Temari and another genin whose name he didn't bother to remember. She was a replacement. Gaara had killed the first following a disagreement on a mission. He didn't expect the new genin to last much longer. At some point, members of another village began to show up in his village. They were from Otogekure, the Hidden Sound. Though Gaara didn't know nor care for the details, he knew that the two villages were plotting to attack one of their former allies, the Hidden Leaf. Starting a period of mourning, Konoha had not held a public Chunin exam in some time. However, this year, as hosts of the exams, they were finally opening their doors to the other villages once more. From the increased frequency of meetings between his father and the Sound's representatives, Gaara knew it was time to strike. Nights passed, and the day of their departure grew closer. Gaara sometimes closed his eyes to rest them, but he dared not sleep. In the full moon, its blood boiled. It was a dark, quiet night. The moon hung low in the sky, a giant pale orb that witnessed all in silence. He was there, standing before him. Foolish little brother. If you want to kill me, then blame me. Hate me. And live on in shame. Run and run. Glowing red eyes with spinning black tomo pierced into him, and suddenly he could see the members of his clan falling in slow motion around him. One by one, they died in a spurt of red blood, and soon, he was the only one left. His brother turned his back to him, clinging desperately to life. Then one day, come before me with the same eyes I bear now. Oh, Sasuke! Are you even listening to me? His eyes slightly widening, Sasuke refocused his gaze on his teammate. Sorry, what were you saying? From his reclining position against the railing, Menma rolled his eyes. I said I heard rumors that the Hidden Mist isn't participating in this year's Chunin exam. They're in mourning since their Mizukage died, or something. Show some respect, Menma, Sakura snapped. How would you feel if it was the Lord Third who died? That's a moot point because that old man's never going to die, said Menma in a smug tone. Sasuke looked down at his reflection in the water below the bridge. It wasn't that long ago that our own village was in mourning. In the corner of his eye, he observed both of his teammates exchanging somber looks. Well, Menma said in a fake cheerful voice. It's the first time in years Konoha is hosting an open Chunin exam. I heard it's going to be a pretty big deal, with a bunch of villages attending. Everyone who's not on a mission is being called back for security. He hesitated. Do you think Naruto will come back for it? Who knows? Even Kakashi-sensei's been very hush-hush about the whole situation. Sakura gave Sasuke a coy look. Has he told you anything, Sasuke-kun? Over the past 2 years, the Jonin known as Copy Ninja Kakashi had taken over their late teacher's responsibilities. In that time, Sasuke had come to realize that Kakashi's seemingly lackadaisical demeanor was merely a front. There was true steel to his gaze, and a lifetime of hard-fought battle experience to back it. Sasuke never asked any questions, however. Following the events of Wave Country, there was a mutual unspoken understanding to let sleeping dogs lie. Not really, he said. Taking his hands off the railing, he left his teammates and began to head back towards the training grounds. As they always did, Sasuke's thoughts trailed back to the moonlit events of his past. He knew that he was growing stronger with every single passing day. But Itachi's words gnawed at him deep inside, had been gnawing at him. Going on B-rank missions and the occasional A-rank, sparring with his teammates, waiting to be promoted to the rank of Jonin, was that all there was to it? Was that enough to kill his older brother? Sasuke didn't have to search deep in his heart to know that it wasn't. The only way to defeat Itachi would be to obtain the same eyes as him. The question was how? This was where Kakashi came in. Sasuke knew that the Jonin somehow had the Sharingan. He had caught a glimpse of it once before, when a simple reconnaissance mission had turned into a full-on skirmish with enemy forces in Rain Country. However, Kakashi had never brought it up again until yesterday, when out of the blue, he had offered to train him one-on-one. Sasuke's cynicism warred with his frustration, and frustration won the bout. There was a restless energy inside of him that refused to subside, and he wondered whether training with Kakashi would be enough to subdue it. Before Sasuke reached the training grounds, he caught sight of the figure of his thoughts and came to a stop. Kakashi was standing in front of the memorial stone. Sasuke couldn't see his face, but even if he could, he doubted he would have been able to read anything in his masked expression. Awash in the glow of twilight, there was a white carnation at the foot of the stone slab. He wondered whether Menma, whose clan ran a flower shop, had been by. Sensing Sasuke's approach, Kakashi turned around and raised a hand in greeting. Perfect timing. Ready for your training? You're 3 hours late, Sasuke said, folding his arms across his chest. Kakashi feigned a look of surprise. I don't know what you're talking about. There weren't enough cots in the medical tent for all the groaning ninja being carried in. Strewn across the hectic space, ninja with blood-stained bandages wrapped around their heads or the stumps of what had once been limbs, drifted fitfully in and out of consciousness. Shouts filled the air as medic nin rushed back and forth, their palms glowing with medical ninjutsu. One of them noticed Karen and impatiently waved her over. Well, come on. It's about time you got here. The unhealed bite marks on her body were already starting to prickle. Karen hesitated and the medic nin, scowling, grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to a man with a head wound. She braced herself as the man hefted himself up then, baring his teeth around her wrist, he bit down. Hot pain seared through her body, and she felt the immediate loss of chakra. This continued bite after bite until Karen was so spent she could no longer prop her own head up. Her whole body was covered in new bites. She felt as empty as a dried husk. But there must have been a few drops of chakra left within her, for she was still alive, and with that, she was left to lie down in a corner to recover. They had learned their lesson with her mother. In her crushing weariness, Karen closed her heavy eyes, and when she opened them again, sunlight streamed painfully into her eyes. As soon as the stars had disappeared, she saw the head ninja of their village, Zosui, appraising her with his cold gray eyes. His words for her were as usual, emotionless and to the point. The Hidden Leaf will be hosting the Chunin exams this year. You're going in one of our genin teams. This is your chance to redeem yourself from your failure in Sunagakure, and I'll be personally there to watch this time. You know what will happen if you fail me again. With the threat hanging in the air, he left her to pick up after herself. The memory of the look on Zosui's face when he found out that none of the Kusa genin had passed the Chunin exam still brought goosebumps. She suspected the only reason why she hadn't been drained of her chakra on the spot was because the daimyo of their country had personally commended Karen on her fight in the third test. Zosui had said to her, "Your only use is your chakra." Karen lived alone in a hut along the fringes of the village. The area was empty. Despite the increasing shortage of ninja as of late, Kusagakure was sending more and more out on missions to earn money for the village. 2 houses down, there was an older woman named Midori who had used to share some of her food with Karen. She had been sent out 5 months ago and had never returned. Just as she closed the door behind her, Karen's stomach growled loudly and she considered her options. She could go back to the medical camp for food, but her chakra reserves were still low, and she knew they would make her heal again. So instead, Karen lay herself down on the ground. It was early morning, and a few rays of daylight seeped into her hut through the cracks in the roof. However, in the haze of her weariness, everything seemed dark. She shut her eyes, but it was the same. There were no chakra signatures around her, it was dark, and she was alone. She felt herself drifting away, and wished she would never have to open her eyes again. Time passed, and hunger pains shook her awake. Sluggishly getting up, Karen put a hand over her grumbling stomach and made up her mind. Though she lacked the energy to go hunting, there were plenty of patches of mushrooms and greens to placate her hunger. The sun shone high in the sky. It burned the back of her neck as Karen slowly gathered what she found in a woven basket. As she got farther and farther away from her village, she eventually found a riverbed. Taking care to put down the basket, she lowered herself by the water and rinsed the dirt off a mushroom. Closing her eyes, she opened her mouth to eat it when she froze. While she hadn't been paying attention, there was a large chakra signature in her vicinity. It couldn't belong to any of the villagers, it was so large, it far eclipsed theirs. Was it in the water? Reaching for a kunai, Karen backed away from the river's edge and retreated into the forest. Though it was possible the owner of the chakra had already caught sight of her, she suppressed her chakra and watched from the shade of a tree. A bee passed. And then too the river's surface broke. A bare-chested boy, no, a teenager, stepped out of the water on the other side of the riverbank. The first thing she noticed was his hair. It was red, burning like fire in the sunlight. The second thing she noticed was that he was holding a large fish in each hand, which explained what he had been doing in the water. Her gaze shot to the basket she had left by the riverside. However, he didn't seem to have noticed this. Without a look back, he began to head into the forest. There was something familiar about him, both physically and in his chakra. His hair color was the same as hers, and it wasn't a common color by any means. Everything still felt cloudy, but she racked her mind and soon, a hazy memory drifted into her consciousness, a small red-haired genin, holding a blade to her neck. Could it be him? The leaf genin she'd fought against in the Chunin exam? Karen closed her eyes and checked his chakra signature again. She shuddered. It was him. It had matured in the years since she'd last felt the chakra, but it shared similarities to the one she remembered, cold and guarded, and intermixed with an immense dark chakra that made her stomach twist. However, as she probed deeper, she started to note several differences. Where it had previously been cold enough to cause her to flinch, it was now cool in the way the river water had felt on her hot hand. And where it had been rough, it now seemed more worn down. There were rounded edges in the place of sharp corners. It was chakra full of contradictions, and Karen wasn't quite sure what to make of it. When she opened her eyes, the chakra signature disappeared and all she could see was the riverbank. Nose, she peered her eyes and checked. There was something there. After making sure nobody else was around, she came out of her hiding spot and waded through the river to the other side. There, where the teen had been standing, was one of the fishes he'd been holding, flopping about on the rocks. Karen felt her heart stop. There was no way he dropped the fish by accident. Had he noticed her before she hid her presence? Why had he left this fish behind? Was it poisonous? Her stomach rumbled. After a moment's pause, she added the fish to her basket. When Karen returned home from scavenging, she cooked the fish over a campfire. The smell of freshly cooked fish caused her to salivate, and she quickly tore into it, burning the roof of her mouth as she did so. It hurt, and she was no stranger to pain, but for some reason, her eyes began to sting. Taking off her glasses, she rubbed her face clean. Has food always been this delicious? The fish must not have been toxic, for that night, she found herself still alive, and she wondered why. She wondered whether Zosui would knock on her door. And as she lay on the ground looking up at the dark sky through the cracks in her ceiling, she had a sudden thought. Had that boy left the fish behind for her? Just before she drifted away, the memory of her last fight as a genin came back to her. It had been far away from here, in wind country, where the air was dry and the sand shone in the moonlight. They had brought out a white cloth there with names etched on it in black, showing the matchups for the third exam. She could remember it now. It had been the very first name. Uzumaki Naruto. Chapter 29, Man of the World. Jiraiya called it gathering research for his novel series. Naruto called it peeping in the women's bath. Once they had reached Snow Country and took up residence at one of the inns, the older man had made himself comfortable in front of the wooden fence that separated the gendered baths. It was not an unfamiliar sight for Naruto, though the last time he had seen Jiraiya in such a position, they had been strangers. Naruto paused beside him. You're a pervert, aren't you? The sage seemed to take offense to this. Tearing his eyes away from whatever vision he had been admiring, he shook a finger in Naruto's face. Such mislaid accusations. You don't seem to realize the considerable following my books have. If these ladies understood how much of this is for the greater good, they'd be lining up for a chance with the great Jiraiya. And there's something you seem to be mistaken about. Drawing back and straightening his shoulders, he pointed at himself. I'm not just a pervert, I'm a super pervert. Naruto found himself at a loss for words. Without responding, he left Jiraiya to his own devices and returned to the outdoor springs. It was empty, and as he settled in, fresh water was pumped into the spring, filling the air with hissing steam. Snow drifted down from the sky. Several flakes landed on his skin, and the rest disappeared into the hot water. He knew he was alone. And yet there in the spring, he thought he could hear someone whispering beside him. Closing his eyes, he let his body sink into the water, and everything fell silent. The land was thick with forests and rivers that teemed with freshly spawned fish. In terms of terrain and climate, Grass Country was the most similar to Fire Country out of all the other countries Naruto had visited thus far, which made sense, as they were neighboring countries. During the day, Naruto practiced incorporating his nature release into his Rasengan. At night, they sat around the glow of a campfire, eating the fish Naruto had caught. Some nights passed in silence as Jiraiya wrote furiously in his notebooks. Other nights, they discussed Naruto's progress or planned where to head next. The matter still felt rather strange to Naruto. When Jiraiya had invited him along his journey, Naruto had accepted without putting too much thought into it. At the time, he had only wanted to get away from it all. But as time passed and everything started to take on the faded glaze of the past, Naruto was beginning to wonder more and more what Jiraiya stood to earn from this. One night, as Jiraiya picked at his teeth with a fish bone, he asked Naruto about his parents. "I never knew them," was all Naruto had to say. Jiraiya wore a carefully guarded expression. "I knew them. Very well, in fact. You have Kushina's hair, but you look like the spitting image of Minato at your age. I can tell you more." "No, that's okay," Naruto broke in. A pause. "Are you sure?" "They're gone and knowing more about them won't help me," he stated simply. Once upon a time, Naruto would have jumped at the chance to learn more about his parents. He had used to haunt the archives, pouncing on even the slightest possible reference to his familial roots. But that yearning belonged to a past age, to a child longing for the possibility of what could have been. Now, the only thing Naruto was concerned with was the present, and the reality that came with it. To survive in this world, he needed to grow stronger. That was what he kept telling himself, anyways. The fire between them crackled, its heat warming his face. Jiraiya lowered the fish bone from his mouth. "All right then. Tomorrow, we'll work on getting you an animal summons." "A toad summons?" "You can sign the toad contract if you want. Or you can try doing what I did to find the animal you have a natural affinity for." The next morning, as Jiraiya looked on, Naruto bit his finger for the blood offering. Molding his chakra with the appropriate hand seals, he planted his hand on the ground. Nothing happened. Several seconds passed in silence. Stroking his chin, Jiraiya looked bemused. "Huh." Lightning flashed, thunder rumbled in the distance. It turned out that the land of lightning was a country of vast mountain ranges. Its name came from the year-long thunderstorms that lit up the clouds. Jiraiya's reasoning for their presence there was as follows. "I noticed you were using your lightning release to speed up your reflexes. But it's unrefined. And there's no better place to hone your lightning release than in this country." Naruto stood in the middle of a storm. He could see lightning fork out in the cold mist around him like branches of a tree. His whole body was tingling. He could feel the hair on his body standing on end. And then with a deafening boom, it struck him. Waves of electricity seared through every cell of his body. He was going to burst into flames, he was going to explode, and then it released him. Naruto fell to his knees, panting. Steam rose off of his skin. It felt as though someone had taken his lightning release, magnified it 100 times, and then deep-fried him with it. "Let's try that again," said Jiraiya. "How is this going to help me?" Naruto asked bluntly. Jiraiya made a low sound of disapproval. "I've seen you wincing while using your lightning release. If it's hurting you, you're not allocating it properly. To do that, your body needs to grow accustomed to conducting electricity." "And just how many more times am I going to have to be struck?" "Maybe a couple dozen times, I'd say." "So your plan is to barbecue me?" A flash of lightning lit up the sage's face as he stroked his chin in contemplation. Remind me, how many shadow clones can you make?" The border of Earth Country ran along a rocky mountain range, while the country itself was desolate, rocky ravines. The wind blowing from the north passed over the mountains, raining down bits of rock and gravel on the traveling pair. "Here we are," said Jiraiya, balancing on a board at the tip of a spindly rock column. "This is where we'll be spending the next few weeks." He failed to mention, however, that they would be spending their nights there as well. Whenever Naruto wearily nodded off to sleep, he fell and awoke to find himself hurtling down through the air. In the beginning, he came dangerously close to being speared to death, and was only saved at the last moment by an extension of Jiraiya's hair that grabbed him inches from the rocky ground. But as the days passed, his reaction speed grew faster, and he started to use a wind to propel himself back into the air. And then, as even more time passed, he stopped falling at all. When 3 days had passed since Naruto's last fall, Jiraiya declared that their training there was complete. "Where are we going next?" he asked, secretly relieved to leave. Sniffing the air, Jiraiya wrinkled his nose. "A bathhouse." At Jiraiya's insistence, not all their time was spent in training. They made a day trip to tea country to visit one of their famous tea houses. The menu boasted an eel-infused brew that, according to the cackling sage, increased a man's vitality. "Give it a couple decades and you'll understand," was all he said. They paid several visits each to the land of noodles and the land of garlic, where after a taste of the local specialties, Jiraiya declared, a frog in a well known nothing of the great ocean. They were warmly welcomed in the land of fangs, a country filled with mountains jutting from the earth. It turned out the daimyo was a big fan of Jiraiya's Ika books. The land of birds was a warm tropical country filled with flocks of migratory birds from all over the world, and according to Jiraiya, with the most beautiful women in the world. In contrast, the land of frost was always cold and dotted with towering ice sculptures in the tundra. They continued to travel. The seasons slowly passed, sometimes in order and more oftentimes not, as they crossed borders. The blue of winter melted into new leaf buds that peeked out from bare branches. Flowers bloomed and fell, their petals swept away by rain. The days grew longer and the nights shorter, and before Naruto knew it, nearly a year had passed since he first left the hidden leaf. One summer day, as they moved further inland through a mountainous region, it began to rain. Feeling the first drop of water hit his cheek, Naruto looked up. It was late afternoon, and the sun was still shining in the sky. There wasn't a single cloud to be seen, but all of a sudden, it began to pour. Jiraiya pointed at something in the distance. "Why don't we take cover until the rain passes?" It appeared to be the roof of a wooden structure peeking out from between the trees. As the rain continued to pelt them, they took a beaten trail that turned into a stone stairway lined with unlit lanterns. Eventually, they passed under a wooden torii gate, and when the structure finally came into view, Naruto belatedly realized it was an old shrine. Jiraiya rummaged in his pockets for a coin, which he tossed into an offering box at the altar. Bowing, he clapped his hands before bowing again. Noticing Naruto watching him, he said in a sage tone, "Rule of thumb, avoid making enemies where you can." The shrine smelled of moss and musty old wood. It continued to pour outside. The sound of raindrops hitting the roof drowned out the sound of Jiraiya's scribbling pen. Leaning his head against a column, Naruto closed his eyes and fell asleep. He was usually so tired from his training that he passed out at night, and woke up in the morning without remembering a thing. But this time, he dreamed, and he dreamed fitfully. When Naruto's eyes snapped open, his heart was racing and his palms were damp with sweat. It was nighttime. He could make out the dark form of Jiraiya slumbering on the far side of the shrine. It had stopped raining at some point because the air was crisp and clear. There was a girl in a kimono standing in front of the shrine, staring at him. Immediately, Naruto reached for his tanto, and then she turned around. In the pale moonlight, he saw something blue glint in her long hair. Naruto felt his heart stop. The girl fled. Before he could stop himself, before he could hold back everything he had been keeping locked away, he called out, "Mayu! Wait!" She didn't stop. She was already at the torii gate before Naruto managed to pull himself together and began to give chase. Somehow, the lanterns along the stairwell had all been lit. In the darkness, their glowing lights appeared to float in midair, illuminating a path much longer than what he remembered. The girl ran impossibly fast. It was as though the wind carried her. Her sandaled feet seemed to barely touch the ground. The air grew colder and thicker with fog. Finally, Naruto started to close the distance on the girl. She was right there, an arm's length away and almost within reach. "Wait!" he cried out again, his voice breaking. The girl must have heard him, for she let out a ghostly laugh. She started to turn her face towards him and then disappeared into the fog. His heels skidding on the ground, Naruto came to a quick stop. He spun in a circle, but couldn't make out anything. Almost fumbling in his impatience, his hands blurred through the seals, futon, daitapa, wind style, great breakthrough. Naruto exhaled, all the air leaving his lungs in a single rush, and a strong wind swept through the area, blowing away the mist. It left him alone in a forest clearing. There was no one else there. As the rest of his surroundings came into sharp focus, he suddenly realized that the hadn't cleared up just the mist, it had cleared up his mind as well. His stomach twisted, and Naruto felt burgeoning disgust for himself. What was he doing, chasing a phantom from his nightmares in the middle of the night? Just as he was about to leave the area, however, he heard a faint rustling sound in a nearby bush. In an instant, Naruto moved. Reaching for a kunai with one hand, he lunged forward with the other and made contact. It was warm and had the texture of fur, and as soon as his hand tightened around it, it began to struggle furiously in his grasp. Paying little heed, Naruto yanked it out of the bush. It was larger than a cat but smaller than a wolf, with a bushy tail and a reddish coat. It was a fox. Its pointy ears lay flat on its head, and it yowled angrily, flailing in the air before him. "What's the big deal?" it yelped. "Let go of me." "Was that you?" Naruto demanded. "It was just a little prank, I swear, no harm intended." Naruto reeled, and in a flash, it seized the chance to bite his hand. Letting out a startled cry, his grip slackened. Wriggling out of his hold, it dropped to the ground and disappeared with a rustle into the bushes. Blood dripped from his hand. Naruto stared after the bushes. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted mournfully. Letting his hand drop to his side, Naruto's legs collapsed below his weight, and he landed on his back on the ground. With that, the rows of trees gave way to the night sky. The first thing he noticed were the stars. They glimmered, shining like scattered dust across a black sea. He thought of how far away they were, and how small he was in comparison. It brought back a memory of the first time Naruto had entered the academy. Nervous and excited, he looked up at the sign that hung above the doors and traced the character for shinobi in his palm. The separate characters of blade and heart came together in a word that by definition meant to endure. "How do you deal with it, sensei?" "We endure." When the Nine Tails had been egging him on in the battlefield, that had been Kakashi's answer as well, to endure. What did it mean to endure? Did it mean to forget? He had thought that by traveling the world with Jiraiya, he would be able to fill the void in his chest. To this end, for the past year, he had tried his best to avoid thinking about anything other than his training and his new experiences. As he looked up at the stars, however, just for that moment, he allowed himself to think about what he had left behind, and his heart ached. "It's hard, sensei," Naruto said aloud. But there was no response. Chapter 30. The Road Continues. The great toad sage was waiting for Jiraiya in a shallow pool of water surrounded by giant scrolls. "Here it is revealed in my dream, despite your perversions, you will manage to become a splendid shinobi. You will come to stand on your own 2 feet, acquiring disciples. One such disciple will one day bring about a great change to the world of shinobi. This I saw in my dream." "A great change?" Jiraiya repeated. "Either great stability or great destruction, the likes of which this world has never seen before. One of those 2 changes." "One of those 2? What do you mean?" The sage's right eye opened a crack. The dark pupil stared straight into what felt like Jiraiya's soul. "You will guide that revolution. And eventually, there shall come a day when you will be forced to make a critical decision. That choice you make will decide which way the change goes." His mind churned with questions, the weight of the prophecy already bearing heavily on his shoulders. What do I do? In order to make the correct choice?" "In my dream you walked the world, writing books." "Books?" A flash of red sparked brilliantly in the puddle by his feet. Naruto's eyes narrowed, but he didn't stop moving. The fox had been following him all morning, making no real effort to conceal its movements. He had a feeling it had been on his scent for longer than he'd realized. As soon as they'd crossed from rice country into hot water country, Jiraiya waved Naruto off with a conspiring glint in his eye. "I think it's about time I took off." Out of consideration for each other's sanity, they had taken to occasionally splitting off for a day at a time. Naruto usually spent the time training with his clones, and as for Jiraiya, well, he assumed the older man had his own needs to take care of. The path Naruto chose took him through a bamboo grove. Green bamboo trunks shot up from the ground, crowding the sky. Rays of sunlight filtered through, reflecting off the trunks and lighting his way through the forest. Crack! His gaze shot to the source of the sound, but there was nothing there. While it was clear the fox was still on his trail, it was maintaining its distance, making it difficult to pinpoint its current location. Naruto wondered whether his previous summons attempt hadn't been as unsuccessful as they'd thought. The only question was, why had it not revealed itself to him? Judging by the lack of hostility, it didn't seem to have any malicious intent, notwithstanding its previous attempt at a prank. When he decided he'd had enough, he stopped. "Come on out already." A summer breeze blew through the grove, and he heard the bamboo trunks crackle. In the distance, a bird whistled. Then with a rustle, the fox emerged from the thicket. In the daylight, Naruto was able to get a much better look at it. It looked like an ordinary red fox, albeit dressed in a black kaori coat. To his bemusement, it lay on the ground and let out a yawn. "What's for lunch?" Judging by the tone of its voice, it was a male fox though. The fact that it was talking at all meant that it wasn't an ordinary animal. "Why are you following me? What is it that you want?" When the fox didn't respond, letting out another yawn instead, Naruto raised a hand to the handle of his tanto. The fox was back up in a flash, his tail swishing in the air. All right. I'll tell you, so calm down." Folding his arms across his chest, Naruto looked at the fox expectantly. With a delicate cough, the fox bent his forelegs in a stiff bow. "My name is Amakuro. You summoned me here with that pitiful offering, and I've been following you to see whether you're worthy of signing my contract." That confirmed it. His natural affinity was for a fox. The irony of the situation didn't escape Naruto, and he had to wonder whether his being the Jinchuriki for the purported demon fox had anything to do with it. "So why did you turn into my teammate? How do you know who she is?" "I didn't and I don't." The fox Amakuro licked at a paw. "I was testing you with an illusion. You saw only what you didn't want to see." "Didn't want to see?" What did that mean? In an effort to clear his head, Naruto exhaled. "Well then? Am I worthy?" Amakuro let out another yawn. "No, I don't think so. You don't talk much and you're too violent. I'm going to pass on this one." Caught off guard, Naruto blinked. While he didn't know what he'd been expecting, it certainly hadn't been rejection. A thorn of irritation was starting to twist in his chest, and for some reason, that irritated him even more. He hadn't expected himself to care at all. "Fine then." It was Amakuro's turn to look taken aback, as he said quickly, "That's it? Just so you know, I'm pretty powerful. You're going to lose out big time by not signing a contract with me. I mean, where else are you going to get a summons as good as me?" "I don't need a summons," said Naruto. Or so he told himself, anyway. As he left the fox behind, he felt a sharp gaze trained on his back. But he could no longer hear anything behind him. It was sunset by the time Naruto reached the village of Yugakure, where he was supposed to rendezvous with Jiraiya. He hesitated before he stepped past the entrance gates, and then pushed his legs forward. Had it really been 5 years since he'd last visited this place? It looked almost exactly the same as it had back then. While there were a few new resort hotels, the hot springs and the crowd of tourists had remained the same. It was as though the incident with Haiden had never happened at all. Colorful lights bobbed in the distance, and as Naruto made his way toward it, he realized a summer festival was going on in the center of the village. Glowing lanterns dangled in the darkening sky. Smoke rose from the food stalls, filling his nose with the smells of fried dough and grilled meats. Some of the attendants wore masks as they strolled between the attractions. There was a stall with a pool full of glimmering goldfish. 3 children were huddled around it, and just as he passed by, one of them shouted out, "Look at that fat one!" Something about the wording brought Naruto to a sudden halt. Everything was spinning, and for a moment, it was as though he'd been transported back in time. If he just looked, it almost felt as though he'd see 2 shadows walking in step behind him. He didn't look. Instead, he stood there, rooted to the spot. The crowd's chatter surrounding him seemed to rise in volume, filling his ears. "Naruto?" He stiffened, but it was a young boy staring uncertainly up at Naruto's 8. There was one around his neck as well. It wasn't the first 8 Naruto had seen in the village. It seemed that for all its increasing tourism, Yugakure still had a population of aspiring ninja. "Yes?" he said. Recognition flooded the other boy's face, and he pointed at himself. "Do you remember me? I'm Taki. You saved me! Naruto did a double take. In his memories, the child he'd saved in the midst of Haiden's slaughter had been barely older than a toddler, and yet the boy in front of him was already starting to lose his baby fat. While he was still shorter than Naruto, coming up to his shoulders, Naruto had a sinking feeling that he would soon be outstripped. It seemed not everything had stayed the same after all. I remember you, he said. The corners of his lips spasmed up in a shot at a smile, but from the other boy's faltering expression, it wasn't one of his better attempts. Where's the rest of your team? Asked Taki, looking around. Naruto felt his throat constrict. They're not here. It's just me. Oh. Taki stopped. It would have been nice to see everyone. His face brightened. Still, I'm really glad you're here. Hey, why don't you let me show you around? He hesitated. If it was anyone else, he would have declined. However, for this one vestige of nostalgia, he let the younger boy lead him around the village. As Taki prattled on about his life over the past 5 years, Naruto found himself becoming swept away in the account of the family noodle business which had failed, causing them to seek a better life in Rice Country. After another abject failure there, the family had recently returned to the village to start again. But I told my parents not to worry. Taki tapped the 8 resting around his neck. I'm going to become a top-notch ninja and take care of them. There was a quieter section of the festival, separated from the colorful stalls and the crowd's chatter by billows of warm steam that rose up from holes in the ground. A small shrine stood there, dimly lit by candles. What's this? Asked Naruto. He didn't remember seeing such a place before. Taki's face was solemn. This is where we remember everyone who died that night. My parents and I come here often to burn incense. In a flash, Naruto remembered that the boy hadn't escaped the incident unscathed. He had lost his sibling. Feeling the need to say something, he said, I'm sorry I couldn't save your sister. It had never before occurred to Naruto to be apologetic, but even as he spoke, he suddenly realized that he did feel sorry for the young boy standing before him. Taki shook his head. To be honest with you, I don't really remember her much anymore. He touched his hair, a long thin braid trailed down from the side, and smiled. The one thing I remember is that mother used to braid her hair. That's why I grew this out so I won't forget. Naruto paused, debating whether he should say it. If it's any consolation, Haiden is dead. Rai killed him in battle. According to the reports, with his unique brand of immortality, Haiden wasn't strictly dead. However, the ANBU ops had gathered the separate pieces and sealed them away, so he was as close to dead as possible. Taki's eyebrows shot up. Far from the expression of approval Naruto had been expecting, he looked troubled. Oh. I see, so, he's dead already. Something about his tone seemed off, and Naruto asked, Did you want to kill him yourself? I think I did, at one point. But Taki inhaled. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful he's dead. It's just, it doesn't really change anything. My sister is still gone. There's nothing you could have done about it, and there's nothing anyone can do about it now. Naruto didn't know how to respond to that. They spent a few more moments in silence in front of the shrine, and soon afterwards they went their separate ways. Bring the rest of your team next time, said the younger boy with a wave. The festival was still ongoing, and Naruto returned to the hubbub of the crowd. As he walked aimlessly between the stalls, he couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with Taki. Even though he had lost his sister 5 years ago, he had none of the bitterness Naruto would have expected. On the contrary, despite the hardships of his circumstances, the other boy seemed to have moved on with his life. It was such an alien concept to Naruto, he found it difficult to wrap his mind around. How could you smile while thinking of someone you had lost? There had also been Taki's response when Naruto had questioned whether revenge was his goal. It doesn't really change anything. On that, Naruto silently agreed. When he had transformed into the Nine Tails, he had flattened Haiden and sent the rest scattering. And yet, it hadn't changed anything. It was possible he had already understood this back at Gato's hideout, when Naruto had spared the Hunter Nin despite his role in Mayu's capture. At the time, he had questioned what had moved him to do so. But perhaps, he realized now, it was because he didn't blame him entirely for his teammates' deaths. The truth was that if Naruto had done his job as leader and ordered his team members back to Konoha, even if Mayu had hated him for it, they would all at least still be alive. However, he had caved in and stayed because he had feared their rejection. While many things had happened, in the end, what had cost him their lives was none other than his own weakness. Suddenly, Naruto realized something warm was running down his wrists. Looking down, he jerked as he saw blood. His fingers had dug into his palms so hard, they'd pierced the skin. As he watched the blood drip to the ground, he felt a heated surge of shame. Wiping his hands clean on the front of his pants, he thought to himself, "Keep it together." The abrupt sound of barking drew him out of his thoughts. It was an ugly, angry sound that shattered the cheer of the festival. Naruto quickly spotted the source near a food stall. A large black dog growled at a young girl, baring its teeth in a show of aggression. "Down, boy!" The dog's owner threw himself on the dog's back to try and stop it. Her face hidden under a mask, the girl backed away, her slight frame shaking. And then Naruto saw it. A tail appeared, poking out from the back of her robes. The dog's owner must have spotted it at the same time, for in a remarkable transition, his concerned face transformed into one of revulsion. He fell back and released the dog, which lunged for the girl, but the only thing left of her was a pile of clothes. Naruto glimpsed the back of a red animal scampering away, before it disappeared into the dark of the forest. Cupping his hands around his mouth, the owner shouted out, "And you stay away!" A murmuring audience had gathered to watch the spectacle. Naruto took in their reactions, which ranged from confusion to utter disgust, before approaching the owner. "Is something the matter?" he asked. The owner, a heavy-set man, squinted suspiciously at Naruto's features. "Are you one of those foxes too?" "I'm a ninja," said Naruto, tapping his leaf 8 meaningfully. Scratching his whining dog's head, the man grunted. "Can't be too careful with these things. I hadn't seen one around for ages. They're bad luck, they are, and thieves at that. If they linger for too long, you know that means something bad is going to happen. But you'll know all about that, I'm sure." "What do you mean?" Raising an eyebrow, the man tapped his forehead. "You're a leaf mean, so I'm surprised you don't know. Rumors say it was a fox with 100 tails that destroyed your village way back when." Beckoning towards his dog, the man added in a low voice, "After seeing that fox, you'd better watch yourself tonight." With the man's departure, the audience began to disperse, and soon, it was as though nothing had ever happened. The crowd moved around Naruto, their conversations fading in and out like waves on the shore. The stall was selling inurizushi, rice stuffed in fried tofu pouches. Naruto bought one, and bit into it. A sweet and yet salty flavor spread in his mouth, and he quickly finished it. His stomach gurgled, and realizing he hadn't eaten all day, he bought another one and scarfed that down as well. Once he had satisfied his appetite, Naruto was about to leave the festival when a stray thought suddenly struck him. It was so simple, he thought. When you were hungry, you ate. He looked down at his stinging palms. The blood had dried and he could see it already healing. Letting his hands fall back down by his sides, he made up his mind. Naruto bought a box of the inurizushi and walked into the forest. The sounds and lights of the festival faded behind him, and he was soon alone. The summer breeze that brushed against his skin was cool, and the dark sky above was filled with stars. He came to a stop before one of the trees, and lowered himself on a knee. A wary voice came from the branches above his head. "What, are you here to mock me?" Naruto placed the box down on the ground. "I brought a better offering." A beat passed, and then with a rustle, the fox jumped down to the ground. Wearing a cautious expression, he examined Naruto's face before dashing forward and tearing into the fried tofu. Clearing his throat, Naruto said, "Just so you know, I'm the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails." "So you are. Munch, munch. And I am a fox." Naruto hesitated. "What can I do to be worthy?" Rice sticking to his snout, Amakuro said, "You can start by getting me another box of this." Jiraiya had yet to make an appearance, no doubt. He was off doing more research for his novels, and so Naruto booked a lone room for himself in an inn that evening. Laying back on the futon, he looked up at the dark ceiling before closing his eyes. "You saw only what you didn't want to see." He had thought about Amakuro's words all day, and after talking to Taki, he thought he had an inkling as to why he had seen Mayu on that night. Maybe he had known all along. Naruto had tried to let go of the past to endure, like Kakashi had told him to. He had tried to replace his team with his training, in the hopes that everything he was feeling would go away. However, even though he had tried to forget, the void was still there, as raw as it had been since the day he'd first felt it. How could you smile when you were alone? How could you endure when it was your fault? There were so many things Naruto didn't understand, no matter how much he thought about it. Even if he spent the rest of his life scouring through the archives, his sanctuary where he had once thought he'd unearth the secrets of the world, he knew that he would never be able to find the answers he needed there. His heart was spinning with regrets, and his head was spinning with questions. But at some point in the night, the smell of inarizushi lingering on his clothes carried him to sleep. The next morning, when Naruto woke up, he found a note waiting for him. Sliding the door of the inn open with a clatter, he left the establishment. The sun was just starting to rise, the rest of the village was still asleep, and the air was still with silence. Barely making his way to the village entrance, he spotted a lone figure leaning against the gates. As his eyes adjusted to the glow of the sunlight, the grinning face of Jiraiya came into focus. "We've got a long journey ahead of us," said the sage. "If you thought your training until now was hard, I've got something coming for you." Taking in a deep breath, Naruto rolled back his shoulders. And then with a nod, he took a step forward. If there was one thing he had learned over the past year, it was that there were still many things that he didn't understand. But he wanted to learn. Chapter 31: Heroes Come Back. In the 3 years since Gato's death, the capital of Wave Country had completely transformed from an impoverished state to a prosperous trading port. What had once been a ghostly coastal town now teemed with the busy activity of commerce and the background bustle of what it took to run it. While it was a change brought about by the efforts of many, no one could deny the role played by the construction of the bridge that connected the island to its much larger neighbor, the Land of Fire. Spanning the sea in a long unbroken line, the bridge culminated in an erected wooden post seared with the bridge's name: the Bridge of Remembrance. Tazuna, the master bridge builder, had stated in his opening ceremony address that it was in honor of the sacrifices that had made the bridge's completion possible. It was not out of the ordinary for passing travelers to observe a moment of silence before moving on to their next destination. However, one particular morning found a certain figure lingering before the post far longer than could have been considered proper. A tip-off muttered in the ear of a wave border official soon brought the man striding over to investigate. "Hey, you there! Don't you see the sign? It says no loitering." Drawing closer, he realized the vagrant wore a leaf Hittite, and came to a wary stop. I mean, do you have your papers, sir?" "Papers?" the ninja echoed, cocking his head. He was of average height, with cropped red hair, and wore standard if bordering on threadbare ninja fatigues. The official cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. Your customs papers." Even though it had been 2 years since Wave Country had officially tightened security around its border, there was still the odd journeyman who'd only just resurfaced and had yet to catch up with the changing times. "Right. My papers." Raising a hand, the ninja pointed at something behind him. "There, he's bringing it." Disapproval creasing his brow, the official began to turn around. "Sir, I recommend that you keep your own papers to yourself at all," he suddenly broke off, realizing there was no one behind him. Something low hummed in the air, and he looked back, but the ninja was gone. The official gulped. He had worked in this field for long enough to know the trees had eyes, and even though he knew the ninja was long gone, he began to make a show of searching the area. Frankly speaking, he hoped his transfer request would go through soon. Border duty was way above his pay grade. If Amagakure's claim to fame was its never-ending rainfall, Haku thought Konohagakure could put in a strong bid for perpetual sunshine. At the very least, he was fairly certain his skin had been irradiated more in the past day alone than in the last 3 months combined. The sunny climate, however, did not seem to be reflected in the personalities of the people of the Hidden Leaf, who wasted no time in making sure the incoming foreigners felt unwelcomed. "I'll bet you 100 Rio that's a girl." "With an Adam's apple that size?" 200 he's packing." "That's assuming he hasn't already paid someone to chop it off." Haku colored, and Swearin levied a scowl in the direction of the howling group of Leaf Genin. "Don't pay any attention to these untalented wannabes," she said in a low voice. "Otherwise, you'll only be playing right into their Agisai?" Having marched right up to the offending group, Agisai impassively glared at them in a sheer likeness of her mentor, the Lady Angel never mind the fact that the kunoichis had barely reached the shoulders of the shortest of them. One of the genin, presumably their leader, stopped laughing enough to give her the evil eye. You got something to say, princess? If I were an ignorant leaf genin like you, Ajisai began slowly, and couldn't keep my mouth shut around ninjas from other villages whose capabilities I knew nothing of, I'd be very afraid. A beat passed, and then the genin averted his eyes, breaking under the pressure. With their bravado shattered, the group scuttled away, jostling each other in their hurry. Thank you, Ajisai, Haku smiled at his team leader. It didn't matter, but I appreciate it. It was only partially a lie. Though he couldn't care less about what they had to say, that didn't mean he didn't find their leers uncomfortable. It's just as we thought. This village is full of small-minded morons, Swearin said scornfully. Staring straight ahead, Ajisai reminded them, just don't forget why we're here. She was talking about their mission to find a Jinchuriki, but Haku felt his right arm throb below his sash and instinctively brought it closer to his body. The memory of that day still woke him in the middle of the night, chest heaving and drenched in sweat. After his loss to the Leaf Nin, he had been surprised to find himself opening his eyes again. His opponents were all long gone, leaving behind only a demolished mountainside as evidence of the hard-fought battle. A painful and slow navigation of the marshlands eventually brought Haku to Zabuza's side. The moment he laid his fingers on the body, he knew it was not the kind of death he could induce with his needles. Cold and stiff, it possessed the finality of their past targets' corpses. Though it took some time with his injuries, Haku buried the body with Zabuza's favored broadsword, and as snow drifted down from the sky, he shed his last tears. When he rose to his feet, ice chilled his bones and fire burned in his veins. Haku? Is everything all right? At the sound of Surin's concerned voice, Haku blinked, returning to the present. While he'd been lost in his thoughts, they had walked into a large hallway filled with what looked like at least 100 other genin applicants. The air was thick with widespread posturing and the ostentatious sound of cracking knuckles. It was clear every single one of them longed for nothing more than to bring glory to their representative village. As always, lies came easily to him. Everything's fine, he said with a smile. I zoned out for a second, that's all. His teammates, as much as he had come to like them over the past 2 years, were no different from the others, in the sense that they thirsted to prove their village equal to the might of the Great Five. But none of that mattered to Haku. Glory, recognition, pride was Zabuza gone. There was now only one thing that moved him day and night, and it was a name. Kakashi of the Sharingan. At the proctor's signal, the sound of pencils scratching on paper filled the exam hall. Blank-faced, Gaara scanned his paper. It took only a few seconds to know that he couldn't answer any of the questions, and a few more to realize the true significance behind the paper test. Temari was intelligent enough to figure it out on her own. His bigger concern was the third genin on their team. He still didn't know what her name was. Leveling a glare at her, he saw her back stiffen in what could have been a sign of acknowledgement. Worst comes to worst, Gaara thought, I'll just have to get rid of her. Somewhere in the periphery of his consciousness, he could hear Shikaku's usual raving, but for the moment, he ignored it. Instead, laying his hand out on the desk, he began to gather the sand he needed for his third eye. It was the perfect technique for the job. The eye was made of his chakra-infused sand, and once connected to his optic nerve, it transmitted everything that it saw. Gaara crushed the eye in his hand and sent the sand particles in the direction of his target, who started to rub irritably at his eye. Taking advantage of the distraction, the third eye reformed above his test paper. As the answers came into Gaara's own field of vision, he picked up his pencil and copied them onto his own paper. Number 43 and 27 start walking. You all fail. While the proctors had already begun to disqualify the weaker teams, he could see the other stronger examinees starting to make their moves. Although the vast majority may as well have been faceless to Gaara, a select few had managed to pique his interest. He would have to wait until a proper test before he could gauge their actual skills. A slight shiver ran through his body. Through heavy eyelids, Gaara glared out in a haze at nothing in particular as he fought to steady his breathing. It was going to be a full moon that night. The hot springs of Snow Country were said to possess legendary medicinal properties, and the beauty of the women of Bird Country was second to none, but there was nothing quite like coming home after a long journey. Balancing himself on top of a telephone pole, with a smile, Jiraiya surveyed the sprawling rooftops of the village he had dedicated his life to protecting. I'm back, he said fondly. As always, the Hokage monument carved into the mountainside overlooked the village. There were 4 heads there now, representing the 4 Hokage who had led the village since its inception. In his entire life, Jiraiya had only ever seen the addition of 1 bust to the monument, and it had been that of his own student. While the 3rd had asked Jiraiya to take up the Hokage mantle, he knew that his destiny lay elsewhere. No, there was someone far better suited for the role than him, but she had her own demons to face. "Jiraiya-sama!" cried out a voice. A bespectacled man gaped up at Jiraiya. Jiraiya jumped down before raising a hand in greeting. "Oh, if it isn't Ebisu!" There were 3 children besides the Jonin. Jiraiya recognized one of them as the 3rd's grandson. The boy had certainly grown since he had last seen him as but a mere babe in his mother's arms. "I didn't even realize you were being called back for the exams," said Ebisu, adjusting his dark glasses. "It was by the Lord Third's judgment. And old as he is, I trust he hasn't gone off the deep end just yet," said Jiraiya affectionately. "Yes, and it's reassuring to see you back in the village. Now, if only Tsunade-sama would change her mind." A cool breeze swept through the area. Jiraiya watched a lone leaf swirling through the air. If only, he thought, they would both change their minds. Gathered beyond a padlocked fence, the group of genin who had passed the first exam all gazed with trepidation up at the forest of death. Watching their reactions, Sakura held back a smile. "And if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee. Before we begin the second exam, there's something I have to hand out." Sakura rustled up the papers from her chipao. "They're consent forms. Everyone has to sign one." Once she had explained what the second exam entailed, a no-holds-barred survivor variation of Capture the Scrolls, she herded the 3-man cells to the hut where her fellow proctors were waiting to hand out the Heaven and Earth scrolls. There were 26 teams, meaning there were 78 applicants still in the running. By the end of the exam in 5 days, at least half of them would have failed, and judging from the bloodlust some of the applicants were exuding, Sakura would be very surprised if there weren't at least a few fatalities. This was, of course, compounded by the fact that several teams from the Hidden Rock were present for the first time in living memory, and inter-village rivalries were running high. But out of all the standardized second exams to proctor, of course the Forest of Death was the one Sakura had to draw from the hat. It served its purpose in weeding out the weaker teams, but it was a touch unrefined for her tastes. Then again, there was only one reason why she'd volunteered as a proctor in the first place. As a certain blonde genin walked into the hut, Sakura raised a hand to her mouth and gasped dramatically. "Ino, is that you? I can't believe I forgot you're still a genin. It must have slipped my mind somehow." Ino gritted out, "You seem to be forgetting a lot of things lately, Sakura. Have you considered getting that checked at a hospital?" "I have actually. It's routine for Chunin to get scanned after missions. But of course, you wouldn't know anything about that." The 2 frenemies smiled daggers at each other as a proctor handed a heaven scroll to Ino's teammates, Choji and an unfamiliar female genin. The latter was Shikamaru's replacement, as he had already been promoted to the rank of Chunin, a fact which would never not surprise Sakura, not for any lack of capabilities, but because of his infamous indolence. This may have perhaps explained his assignment as one of the referees of the third exam, a role she did not envy at all. The genin teams were all situated at the gates, waiting for her signal to start the exam, when a blonde male suddenly flickered into the space beside her. Sakura raised a questioning eyebrow. "What is it, Menma?" she asked, wondering whether he'd brought news from the Hokage. His eyes flicking hesitantly at the other proctors, Menma said in a low voice, "I thought you'd want to know Naruto's back." Hailing from a country overflowing with forests, Karen and her team were no strangers to being dwarfed by the local flora. After several minutes of leaping between the branches, however, Karen found herself beginning to question what was up and what was down. Unlike the natural habitats back home, the trees in the arena weaved unnaturally in and out with each other. It was clear they had been grown for the express purpose of disorienting any who dared to trespass. Only when they had put some distance between themselves and the gate did her teammate, Kazami, motion for them to stop. "So, Karen, how's the competition looking?" he asked. Closing her eyes, Karen focused and opened her mind's eye, casting her senses through the forest. Her first concern was the monster from the hidden sand. When she had first sensed his evil chakra, it had been so thick with bloodlust she'd almost gagged on it. Thankfully, his team was all the way on the opposite side of the forest, and she made a mental note to make sure it stayed that way. There were plenty of other strong chakra signatures in the forest, but what stood out to her the most was a vibrant one from the hidden rain. She'd sensed it before in the first exam and then gotten a glimpse of him just before the second exam began. He may have had a pretty face and an outwardly gentle demeanor, but chakra spoke no lies. It was as cold as ice, and she added it to her rapidly growing list of people to avoid at all costs. As had been her observation in her previous Chunin exams at Sunagakure, the Hidden Leaf made a strong showing with its participating teams. While none of them stood out as much as the previous two Karen had noted, they were all robust and for the most part, warm chakra signatures. She paused and wondered where he was. He was already a Chunin and wouldn't be participating in the exams, but maybe he was in the village? If only, Karen thought, she could talk to him and… A beefy hand shook her by the cuff of her shirt, breaking her out of her thoughts. "Hurry it up," said Barami, her other teammate, a man who was as wide as he was tall. "Barami," Kazami admonished. "Have some patience. I'm just giving her some encouragement, that's all." Despite how it may have seemed, Barami was still one of the gentler genin in Kusagakure, for which Karen was grateful. If she had been placed in Team Shore, the other grass team that had passed the first exam, she suspected she would have already been completely drained by now. Even as she thought this, Barami bared his teeth and bit into her arm. She winced, feeling the chakra leave her body. The next 5 days were going to be long. When the ANBU Ops Hiruzen had sent out to locate Naruto returned with the report that the boy was on top of the Hokage monument, he contemplated summoning him to his office as he'd always done. But it was a warm spring day, and he thought his aching muscles could use a stretch, so he put on the Hokage's hat and set out at a brisk pace. He soon found Naruto seated on top of the second Hokage's stone head. Catching sight of his face lit up in the glow of the setting sun, Hiruzen came to a sudden stop. The resemblance to Minato is even more uncanny now, he thought soberly. However, he kept his expression carefully schooled. With their complicated history, he knew that any overtures of warmth would be duly met with a rebuttal. His usual smoking pipe in hand, he said, "So you've come back." Naruto inclined his head in greeting. "Hokage-sama." Hiruzen paused, noting that it wasn't just his features that had matured. His voice had deepened as well. It had been almost 3 years since he had last seen Naruto, meaning the boy was now 15 years old. He shouldn't have been surprised by the changes, but the way children seem to grow up in the blink of an eye always managed to catch him off guard. While Jiraiya had already given Hiruzen the rundown of their journey, he would have preferred to set aside an evening to discuss Naruto's progress. However, given the ongoing nature of the Chunin exams and the rampant presence of foreign ninja throughout the village, this was neither the time nor the place for it. "The reason why I've called you and Jiraiya back is that the Akatsuki have been growing bolder with their movements. Their motives remain unclear, but there's no question that their main objective is to capture all the Jinchuriki." "And you would rather have the Leaf's Jinchuriki secured in your village than wandering outside," Naruto said drily. With a twinge of discomfort, Hiruzen recalled the voices of his council members echoing that exact sentiment. "While I have complete faith in Jiraiya, I also have reason to believe that Akatsuki will make a move sometime during the Chunin exams." "They're coming here to Konoha?" Naruto raised his eyebrows. "What's the going bid for me?" Though he spoke in a light tone, Hiruzen wouldn't have been surprised if the boy actually held such suspicions. "I hope you're joking, Naruto." "It was made in poor taste. I apologize." Naruto stood up, and Hiruzen suddenly realized that the boy man was now taller than him. "So what will you have me do?" he asked, his tone resigned. Even as Naruto looked expectantly back at him for his orders, Hiruzen had a feeling that his mind was somewhere far away. "The second test of the Chunin exams has just begun in Area 44, and I've already put operatives in place to report back on any suspicious activity. It would give me some peace of mind if you would lend me your strength and join them." It was the reason why he had approached Naruto, and judging from the other's expression, he knew it too. "As you wish, Lord Third." Forming the tiger seal, Naruto disappeared. Left standing alone on the Hokage's monument, Hiruzen let out a sigh. He had a mountain of paperwork waiting for him at his desk, but as he stared out over his village, he allowed himself a moment's reprieve. While the intel on Akatsuki's latest movements was the most pressing matter, it was hardly his only concern. He had his hands full enough as it was dealing with the foreign delegations. The hidden rock had extended a hand of friendship towards the hidden leaf in spite or perhaps because of their long antagonistic history, a hand which Hiruzen shook only after carefully weighing the potential risks and benefits. He didn't know yet what the Tsuchikage's true objectives were, but neither he nor the world had forgotten the tragedy of Yasuga Pass. As always, you tell the Jinchuriki far too much. At least you're keeping him busy. I'm putting his skills to use, Hiruzen responded. The glow of twilight cast his lumpy shadow across the rock, and as he watched, a figure stepped out from it. Whatever you call it, said Danzo coldly. Lowering the pipe from his mouth, Hiruzen exhaled in a gust of smoke. Say what you would about his past actions, he did genuinely care for Naruto, who was as much Minato and Kushina's son as he was a Jinchuriki. Following the tragic demise of Team 7, he'd gone as far as to authorize his indefinite departure from the village despite strong opposition, namely from Danzo. But having confirmed with his own eyes that Naruto had indeed returned to Konoha, Hiruzen would never admit that deep down, he was relieved. Using hunger as a tool to sharpen the senses, the standard protocol for reconnaissance missions required a certain level of insatiety. But the journey back to Konoha had been long and taxing, and Naruto headed to his old haunt. As he picked his way through the village, he left a trail of destruction in the form of stunned faces in his wake. Judging from the double takes and the frenzied murmuring, he knew the news of his return would spread like wildfire to the rest of the village. It was a reaction that had once disheartened and frustrated him, but now, he felt only the faintest stirring of something akin to wistfulness. It was dinner time, and Ramen Ichiraka was as busy as ever. Welcome! A young woman greeted him. Naruto recognized her as the owner's daughter. Tsuchi himself was tasting the broth behind the counter. As the other customers realized who he was, the hubbub began to quiet down. Perhaps noticing this, Tsuchi looked up. Catching sight of Naruto, he looked surprised and then he smiled. Will it be the usual then? Seating himself on a stool, Naruto was soon digging into a large bowl of miso pork ramen. He was draining the last of his broth when the soft thump of the flap sounded, letting everyone know that someone had come in. For a moment, the thick smell of ramen thinned as fresh evening air wafted in. Welcome! Tsuchi brightened. I haven't seen you in a while either. The stool beside Naruto clattered as a masked ninja made himself comfortable. The usual please, Tsuchi-san. With extra garlic. Coming right up. Tsuchi paused, looking at Naruto's empty bowl. Will that be a second helping for you? The standard protocol for reconnaissance missions required a certain level of insatiety. But the journey back to Konoha had been long and taxing, and Naruto nodded. Yes, please. Chapter 32, Distant Thunder. Despite the years that had passed since they had last seen one other, Kakashi didn't appear to have changed much. He still wore his 8 over his Sharingan eye, and a mask covered the lower half of his face. There may have been 1 or 2 more wrinkles around his lone visible eye, but his hair had always been silver, and while 3 years had felt like a long time to Naruto, in the grand scheme of things, it probably wasn't very long at all. You look the same, sensei. While still facing the counter, Kakashi's eyes veered to the side towards him. I'd say the same about you, Naruto, but I'd be lying. You've grown. I finally hit my growth spurt, he replied drily. It's not surprising, given who your parents were. Who knows? At this rate, I'll catch up to you, sensei. Tsuchi slammed 2 steaming bowls of ramen before them. Eat up. Taking out a pair of chopsticks from a wooden box, Kakashi said, Poor is the pupil who does not surpass his teacher. Or so they say. The miso broth and the ramen noodles were thick and hot, and the pork belly slices melted into Naruto's mouth. They downed their broths at the same time, lowering the bowls down on the counter. The other customers in the stall had started to talk again, and the ambient noise of their chatter circled around them. It was Kakashi who restarted the conversation. I'm heading Team Shirakumo now. Naruto had suspected as much. Are they giving you as much trouble as we used to do? Through the mask, the corners of Kakashi's mouth lifted back. If only. With the way Sakura and Menma are constantly at each other's throats, I'm just amazed they made it in one piece through their Chunin exams. I suppose Sasuke probably had something to do with it. Then I take it they won't be participating in the Chunin exams going on right now. They'd been Chunin as of 2 years ago. While the other Jonin teachers have been exercising a bit more caution with preparing their students, when it came to this team, I couldn't have stopped them even if I'd wanted to. His old teacher's voice was exasperated, but Naruto could detect a note of pride in it. The news of the other Jonin teachers holding back their genin was hardly surprising for Naruto. In wartime, when personnel was running scarce on the battlefields, any schmuck who could throw a shuriken was promoted to chunin and sent out to fight. But in peacetime as they were now, when their ranks were already thinned out, it must have been quite the unexpected blow to lose two promising young chunin and a veteran jonin on what had started out as a standard B-rank mission. What was more disconcerting for Naruto, however, was the careful way Kakashi was treading regarding the topic of his new team. He thought it was a given that a ninja of his talents would be charged with the instruction of another promising team. Still, considering the atmosphere of their last exchange before Naruto left the village, Kakashi's trepidation was understandable. "Is that you, Naruto? You're back." Naruto took a second to identify the blonde male and leaf chunin fatigues beaming down at him as a member of Team Shirakumo. Or rather, Team Kakashi now, he supposed. Drawing up before them, the male Menma, as he recalled it, took in Naruto's appearance with a wide-eyed look of disbelief. "Wow, it's really you. How was your training?" Menma leaned in towards Naruto, dropping his voice conspiratorially. "I heard you were with one of the Sannin." It seemed Menma had yet to learn a thing or two about personal space. Naruto felt himself sweat. "Congratulations on your promotion." Surprisingly, Menma waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that was a while ago. What's more impressive is that you got direct training from one of the Sannin. I mean Kakashi-sensei, no hard feelings, but a Sannin." "None taken," said Kakashi cheerfully. "Menma, aren't you supposed to be helping to predict the Chunin exam?" "Ugh, right. I was looking for Sasuke, but then I heard that Naruto was here." With a grimacing salute, Menma disappeared under the stall flap. Left in the wake of what felt like a passing storm, Naruto looked down into his bowl, his reflection swimming in the remaining flecks of oil. While he didn't know exactly what he'd been expecting, it looked as though everyone was doing well. In his absence, the world had continued to move. The flap to the ramen stall lifted up once more, and someone walked in with an exclamation of hunger. The dinner rush was about to begin. Standing up to make room, Naruto and Kakashi paused and regarded each other. Though he'd barely reached Kakashi's shoulders before, they were almost the same height now, and the idea of him outstripping the Jonin no longer seemed so far-fetched. The same thought must have occurred to Kakashi. "It's been a while since we last faced off. We'll have to have a rematch sometime soon." Naruto nodded, his thoughts already racing with possible strategies. "I'd like that." The Forest of Death was a common training ground for Chunin, and Naruto himself had favored it in his earlier years. It had been some time since he had last stepped foot in Area 44, however, and most of it was unfamiliar to him. The forest had evolved in his absence. Still, one thing had remained the same, and that was the unsettling feeling of being trapped in a maze. All in all, it made the perfect stage for the Chunin exams. The second test was now fully underway, with multiple candidate teams already clashing with one another. Perhaps fueled by adrenaline, the majority of the teams seemed intent on the offensive instead of preparing sustenance and shelter for the inevitable days ahead. In true genin fashion, the majority of the skirmishes weren't lethal, and given the massive scale of the forest, Naruto would have been hard-pressed to find anything worthy of report. "I've already put operatives in place to report back on any suspicious activity. It would give me some peace of mind if you would lend me your strength and join them." In the eerie stillness of Naruto's surroundings, far from the hubbub of the village, it was easier to attempt to discern the Hokage's true intentions. The most superficial interpretation was that the Hokage wanted to gauge Naruto's abilities, and also bring him back into the third service. While it was already an underhanded way of killing two birds with one stone, Naruto couldn't help but feel as though there was something else lurking beneath the surface. Something bigger than his return was happening in the village right now, and he would bet his Tonto it had something to do with the presence of the hidden rock in the exams. There. Naruto came to an immediate stop. Through a patch of vines, he could make out two teams facing each other down. Judging from their apparel and height, it would be a showdown between leaf and rock, an inevitable confrontation, given their shared history of conflict in the world wars. Of further note, he thought he could vaguely recall the leaf team, two females and an overweight male from his initial class at the academy. "Just hand over your scroll, And maybe we'll let you walk away from this, said the rock team's leader. One of the Leaf Genin scoffed, flipping her long blonde hair. Someone's going to be handing over their scroll, all right, and it's not us. Out of principle, Naruto fought against the urge to roll his eyes. While trash talk was a basic strategy to stave off one's opponent, while sizing them up, he had a feeling it would be empty words rather than fists that determined the outcome of this specific encounter. You Leaf Ninja think you're so smart inviting us here, but we know what you're really trying to do, said the Rock Genin. And we're here to make sure it doesn't happen. This caught the attention of the lone male Leaf Genin, who for some reason was munching on a bag of chips. What do you mean? Drop it. They're just Genin, what would they know? Hissed another Rock Genin. Look, I don't know what crazy stuff your Kage is telling you guys, but honestly, that's got nothing to do with us, said the blonde. We're here to pass the exam. All three members of the rock team stiffened. You dare insult the Lord Third? You'll pay for that. Finally abandoning words for fists, the screeching sound of metal meeting metal resounded through the air. The two teams seemed evenly matched, and it could go either way. Naruto wasn't interested in sticking around for a genuine fight, especially when it seemed the teams were done talking. At the very least, he wouldn't be leaving empty-handed, thanks to the Rock Genin's slip of tongue. In a small clearing deep in the woods, dark blood rained down from the sand-encased body. Temari could hear it splattering heavily on the top of her umbrella. As was usually the case around Gaara, the teammates of the Genin who had just been crushed to death began to beg for their lives. We'll give the scroll to you. Please, just let us go. And as usual, their voices fell upon deaf ears. Dropping his umbrella, Gaara raised his two hands and squeezed. His sand rose to his bidding, and 2 splatters later, the entire team was dead. Distastefully taking in the bloody sight, Temari let out a sigh. From the corner of her eye, she saw their new teammate, a younger Genin named Matsuri, who'd been hastily recruited as replacement, wave her hand cheekily. Bye. Temari's lips twisted into a half-smile. Once upon a time, she had found such scenes similarly amusing, but nowadays, they merely brought her a sense of increasing apprehension for Gaara. He'd never been normal, but family was family, and when it came down to it, he was her brother. It was one of the reasons why she'd agreed to remain a Genin over the past few years, instead of being promoted to Chunin, as was expected of a kunoichi of her age and prowess in the village, to keep watch over the Sand's greatest weapon. While he didn't listen to anyone, at the very least, he acknowledged Temari's existence, and in theory, she could keep him in check. It was a haphazard system that had somehow gotten them through the past few years. These days, however, something was changing in him. Whatever was left of Gaara was slipping away. She could feel it more and more acutely. She could feel something else in his body glowering out at the world through dark-rimmed eyes, biding its time. As Gaara's blood-soaked sand returned to his gourd, Matsuri walked over to the chunks of flesh that now littered the ground. Her nose wrinkling in disgust, she bent over and picked up a damp scroll. It's a heaven scroll, she announced. While Gaara didn't respond, Temari felt his eyes turn towards her, and she suppressed a shudder. Good, she said instead. Let's head towards the tower. Although the trees were too dense to see much past the canopy from the forest floor, judging from the ever-growing darkness, the sun had just about set on the day. They're late. Did they get killed off already? Burami grouched, hungrily tearing the cap off a large mushroom. Kazami paced, as he had done for the past hour. It's hard to believe Shore and his team, of all people, would have been taken out so quickly. It's not like them to run late, but if Karen can't see them. Despite having already searched the forest several times within the last hour, Karen had been unable to locate the chakra signatures of their fellow Kusa Genin. With her current capabilities, the range of her mind's eye was wide enough to cover the radius of a large swathe of the forest. It was a grim indicator of their fates. Well, she could have messed up, so have her checked again, said Burami impatiently. Opening her mouth in protest, Karen had to stop herself. While she'd yet to meet anyone who could hide their chakra from her, her teammates didn't have as much faith in her abilities. And in her opinion, it was always better to be underestimated. Compliantly closing her eyes, she concentrated her mind's eye and froze. There was a new chakra signature within her range, rapidly approaching them, and it was so foul, she felt bile creeping up her throat. It reminded her of the pungent smell following a battle, when the reek of rotting flesh from both the injured and dead started to permeate the cloth of the medical tents. It was moving at almost unbelievable speeds, and it seemed as though it would pass them by when, to her horror, as though sensing her gaze, it suddenly seemed to slow down by them. If there was one thing Karen's years in the hands of Zosui had done for her, it was honing her survival instincts. Said instincts were screaming at her now, and immediately opening her eyes, Karen stood stock still as sweat poured down from her temples. While it was not the biggest or most powerful chakra signature she had ever seen before, she had never before felt so much like prey, trapped in the impending fangs of a predator. Even if she were to run now, she knew it was far too late. "What's wrong with you?" As though sounding from a distance, Karen heard Burami ask. It was astonishing to her how unaware her teammates were of their imminent demise. They were almost within the striking distance of an absolute monster, and yet Kazami continued to pace and Burami to eat. Several minutes went by, each second passing like daggers stabbing into her chest. But nobody approached them, and when Karen finally reined in the courage to check again, the chakra signature had somehow disappeared. She was just about to open her eyes, when suddenly, she felt what she had been searching for from the moment they entered the village: an immense chakra, both sharp and rough, both cold and yet strangely nostalgic, a chakra full of contradictions. They said that 3 heads were better than 1, and in Naruto's case, 20. While the Hokage had said there were other operatives in the forest running surveillance, they would not be reporting back to Naruto, nor did he have any faith that the Lord Third would be in the mood to divulge any information. Once his shadow clones had been sent out to disperse themselves throughout the forest, Naruto decided it was late enough in the day to pursue his next priority of interest. Naruto bit into his thumb for the blood offering. Kuchiyos no Jutsu, summoning technique. Clouds of smoke fanned out from a red fox that landed nimbly beside him. About time. I was starting to think you'd finally given up. You won't get rid of me that easily. We'll see about that, said Amakuro, flicking his tail. Naruto eyed the fox critically. It had definitely gotten bigger since he last summoned it just a few days ago. Whereas the fox had barely reached his knee the first time they met, its head now reached Naruto's shoulder, and that was with his own growth spurt over the past 2 years. It was a possible indicator that, no matter how much Amakuro griped about helping Naruto, it was reaping some tangible benefit of its own out of their contract. Either that, or Amakuro was as much a shooting beanstalk as it often delighted in describing him as Naruto. The forest of death was almost entirely covered in a canopy of dense foliage, but it thinned out towards the center, allowing moonlight to peek through to the forest floor in patches. Taking in a deep breath, Naruto settled down in one such patch. Bringing his hands together on his lap, he closed his eyes and stilled his heart. By signing the summoning contract with Amakuro, Naruto had expected to eventually be granted access to the Fox's Sage region. When Jiraiya had first introduced the notion of Sage Mode to Naruto, he had told him of the wonders of Mount Myaboku, an entire hidden land that served as home for the toads and training grounds for hopeful practitioners to hone their senses. When he'd first ventured the topic with Amakuro, however, the fox simply looked amused. Why settle down when foxes can live anywhere the moon reaches? The key to reaching Sage Mode was concentration and balance. The first part was not an issue for Naruto, who had long since mastered the art of meditation. The issue was with the latter. Balancing natural energy with his own physical and spiritual energy wasn't as simple as it sounded, especially when his energy happened to harbor a tailed beast. Whenever he thought he had achieved balance, something in the beast's chakra rejected it, creating a disturbance that destroyed it. Something about it brought back some dusty memories for Naruto. Back when he had been in the academy, he could remember trying to study the seal on his abdomen and the 9 tails chakra that always seemed to disrupt his ninjutsu. Ultimately, his efforts hadn't led anywhere thanks to the interference from the taboo seal, and he had simply chosen to ignore the alien chakra. Given this frustrating impasse with the beast's chakra, Naruto was beginning to wonder if there was something he could do to block it from his own. However, while Jiraiya had taught Naruto the fundamental basics of Fuinjutsu over the years, it wasn't something that could be properly explored for a pair that had constantly been on the move. Dismissing these thoughts, Naruto was just starting to channel his focus when Amakuro spoke. I sense a giant mass of chakra in the forest, another tailed beast. Its voice was low and urgent, with none of its usual snide. In an instant, the implications of such a statement became clear. A freed, rampaging tailed beast would undoubtedly have made itself known by now, which could only mean that there was another Jinchuriki in the forest besides Naruto. The question then became, were they one of the genin candidates, one of the foreign delegates, or something else? Before Karen could convince herself that it was a bad idea, her mouth opened on its own. "I've found him." Her teammates shot to their feet. "Lead the way," said Kazami, his voice tinged in obvious relief. Swallowing, she nodded. Though Karen would pay for it dearly when they found out she'd been lying, she couldn't let this chance slip through her fingers. For all she knew, Naruto was simply taking a shortcut through the forest on his way out of the village. She wanted to meet him. Properly this time she wanted to thank him for the fish, and ask if he remembered their fight in the Hidden Sands Chunin exams, and well, she didn't know what else she could say to him, but in her surging excitement, she brushed that negligible thought aside. She could tell Naruto had several clones spreading out through the forest, but the real Naruto wasn't too far from their team's position. As she focused, she could sense a secondary chakra presence with him. Though it wasn't human, she could sense a connection between the two, a summons, perhaps? The trees were starting to thin out, they were drawing close. Karen could feel her heart pounding in her ears, and she sped up, leaving behind her teammates. Soon they would meet. As though Naruto didn't already have enough on his mind, Amakuro's ears fell back flat against its head. "There's a sensor type nearby, and they're coming straight for us," it warned. "They shouldn't be an issue for you, but there's something about one of them." By then, Naruto could pick it up as well. A team of 3 was rapidly approaching, making little effort to hide their presence, which meant they either thought he was weak, unlikely, considering the pinpoint accuracy with which the sensor type had detected him, or that he was their ally. Neither was true. However, while he could have used some light exercise, he wasn't a participant in the exams, and he had a feeling the Hokage wouldn't be appreciative of such direct interference. It was time to leave. A wave of blue lightning crackled from his feet up to his head before dissipating into the air. The low, almost indiscernible hum of electricity filled the air, and as Naruto felt his hair stand on end, he knew that if he so chose, he could have been to the other side of the forest before his pursuers could even stop to blink. But something about the way Amakuro had described it had piqued his interest, and Naruto slowed down just long enough to get a glimpse of his would-be pursuer, a red-headed Kusa-genin about his age, eyes starting to widen in belated shock as he passed her. As he shot out of range, he thought she looked vaguely familiar. Chapter 33, Evening Moon. As the various genin teams were herded to their assigned gates, Team Agisai found themselves starting the second exam at Gate 3, putting them deep in the northeastern sector of the exam site. According to their team's sensor, Swearin, that also put them well within striking range of the monster from sand. "You're sure that's the Jinchuriki Tenchi-sama was talking about?" Agisai asked for the 5th time that day. "Who else could the lady have been speaking of?" said Swearin. "It was so monstrous, the moment I felt it, I almost threw up." Haku resisted the urge to scowl, forcibly maintaining his usual serene smile. Almost was an understatement. The oily stain on his sash from when she dribbled on him could attest to that. Swearin cast him an anxious look. Given his level of chakra, I don't know if even Haku could win in a one-on-one against him. Haku wasn't a censor, but he thought he could have figured that much out for himself. He had gotten a passing look at the Suna genin in question during the first exam, and his immediate impression was that with his bloodshot eyes and uncontrolled bloodthirst, the shinobi looked downright unhinged. While Haku was confident in his ability to hold his own in a confrontation, he was not quite willing to stake his life on it. "It's a good thing, then, that Tenchi-sama's orders were merely to bring back information," he replied neutrally. Agisai's face cleared, as it tended to do whenever the lady's name was mentioned. "That's right. For now, our focus is on passing the second round." According to the second exam proctor, this would not just be a test of their offensive abilities, but also of their survival and endurance skills. The exam had a time limit of 5 days, and required at least 2 members of your team to reach the tower in the center of the forest while in possession of both the Heaven and Earth scrolls. It was a simple exam, where the weak would be weeded out and the strong would prevail. While Haku's teammates were not exactly prodigies, they were more than capable of carrying their own weight, and he had little doubt they would pass. Unfortunately, it seemed that the exam had other plans for Team Agisai. Just as they had divided up their roles, Swearin suddenly stiffened, her face turning ashen. "There's something coming. Run!" she broke off as with a flash, a thin line of red appeared on her neck, and then her head twisting at an unnatural angle, she crumpled to the ground. Haku had already started to move the moment he saw the look of horror on Suiren's face. Just as he dodged backwards, he managed to catch sight of a long and narrow blade slashing right through where his head had been. Suiren! He heard Ajisai cry out in anguish. Good she had survived, too. No longer caught under the element of surprise, it was a simple matter for Haku to detect the shrill sound of metal flying through air. Easily deflecting the kunai with his, he backed up against Ajisai, who had drawn out her armamentarium of sealing tags. Not bad, an unfamiliar voice breathed. It belonged to a genin that had suddenly appeared, dangling upside down on a nearby tree branch. His long black hair hung to the ground, revealing his kusa hitate. Now why don't you show me what else you've got? Haku raised his left hand in a seal. Gladly. The air rapidly dropped in temperature, and the forest around them filled with thick white mist. Though he didn't wear the hunter-nin mask anymore, Haku could feel his emotions receding, and his face glazed over. It felt more natural that way than the smiles he always wore in public. It told him that he hadn't forgotten his roots. Hayatan Hyoso, ice release, ice spears. In an instant, ice crackled out of midair into deadly spears that exploded into the tree the genin hung from. With inhuman speed, the genin leaped away, letting loose a ghostly laugh of delight. Not to be forgotten, Ajisai jumped in, sending a barrage of summoned shuriken after the genin. However, the genin was proving himself slippier than he'd appeared, as with apparent ease, he weaved between their combined attacks. Eyes narrowing, Haku sped up and matched the shinobi's movements. In a match of speed, he would not lose. Mother was screaming again. Gripping his head, feeling as though it would split in his agony, Gaara staggered. His sister shouted his name, but he shoved her aside. Rip her head off, crush her into pieces, give me blood, feed her to me, slice her up, rip out her heart, give me blood, give me blood. The screaming always began at night. It was strongest when the moon took up the entire sky. Gaara knew that a single moment's lapse of consciousness would lead to Mother taking over his body, and he couldn't let that happen. He wasn't sure why, but he knew he had to stay alert. When its blood began to boil, and he felt his eyes starting to roll back, Gaara knew he had to do something to appease it. If he didn't, he would implode. Rip her body apart, crush her innards, blood, give me blood. It must have been the fault of the full moon, but Mother had not been satiated by the 3 Gaara had killed earlier that day. He inhaled, looking out at the world through a red haze. His sister, currently shouting something indiscernible at him, was the closest to Gaara, but he moved on. As annoying as she was, he couldn't kill her. That left their other teammate, the girl, whose name he still didn't know. There was no point, when he always ended up killing them. Give me blood, I can't take it, crush, slaughter, kill. Don't worry, Mother, he snarled, his voice twisting gutturally in his throat. I'll get you what you want soon enough. At his bidding, his sand rose out of his gourd. The spy he had planted in Amigekure had not been lying in his reports when it came to the mysterious boy. It was with increasing delight that Orochimaru watched the battle unfold before his eyes. The boy's every movement, in its speed and gracefulness, was a work of art. The way he effortlessly obliterated their surroundings with cold, single-minded efficiency sent a shiver tingling down his spine. Given the way he wielded ice as though it was an extension of his body, it must have been a powerful Genkai. Best of all, however, was his face. A host candidate could have had the rarest Genkai in the entire world. If the face was not to Orochimaru's liking, he wouldn't have given it a second glance. Cutting short his internal monologue, Orochimaru leaped away from a barrage of water needles, each one as deadly as a blade. Despite his efforts, one cut through his cheek, shredding the skin of his borrowed face. He could feel the cold air brush against his actual host's body's flesh, and he let out a hiss, half pain, half pleasure. This boy made coming back to this pathetic village all the more worthwhile, even if the Uchiha boy was off limits. Making up his mind, Orochimaru decided it was time to stop playing with his food. Dropping low to the ground, his neck elongated, and his head shot forward through the air. Before the boy could react, he bit his neck, leaving behind a small piece of himself, his cursed seal. Drawing back, he tasted the blood in his mouth, and felt satisfaction spread like wildfire through his body. Oh, this boy would serve very well as his next host. Come find me when your own strength can take you no further, he hissed. As the boy fell to his knees, screaming, Orochimaru disappeared. Given the lethal nature of the second exam and the stage that it took place in, Sakura had been more than prepared to see the dead bodies that would inevitably crop up. As Izumo and Kotetsu made the report, however, the sight before her eyes made even her legendarily tough stomach turn. Judging from their belongings and the papers we found, they were all shinobi from the Hidden Grass, and were registered to take part in the Chunin exams. And as you can see, their features are completely gone, the faces are as smooth as if they'd been melted away. Show me the photos from the dead shinobi's ID. At once. Sakura scanned the photos, her brow furrowed in thought. She could only vaguely recall the faces from the crowd of genin that had lined up for their consent forms and scrolls. It was difficult to say whether this team had been killed before or after the exam had started, and what kind of ninjutsu could do this to the bodies. Izumo and Kotetsu, please report what's happened to the lower third, she instructed, before turning to her teammate, who was eyeing the bodies in an appalled but curious sort of way. Menma, review whatever security footage we have within the vicinity for me. I want to know what exactly happened here. With her orders, the three Chunin disappeared, leaving Sakura alone to grimly regard the forest. Something about the faceless bodies at her feet had her wondering what other horrors could possibly be occurring in there, and the words she'd uttered sarcastically to herself earlier came to mind. And if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee. Their eyes had met. Karen was sure of it. Naruto had seen her, and recognized her. That had to have been what had happened, because otherwise she would have been nearly completely drained of her chakra and thrown against the side of their makeshift shelter for no good reason. As predicted, Barami and Kazami hadn't taken it well when she suddenly stopped and told them she had lost track of the chakra. They hadn't been able to catch sight of the ninja that blitzed past them, and were still under the impression it was Shior's ghost that they'd been chasing. Karen wasn't stupid. She didn't tell them that Shior was long dead. Instead, she let them bite her arms and guzzle down her chakra, before snoring away on a full stomach while she kept watch. It was a full moon, her whole body ached. And yet, somehow, the light seemed to ease the aching in her chest just a little bit. As the first day of the exams drew to a close, an ANBU Black Op approached Naruto and traded off with him for the night. The Lord Third apologizes for putting you to work so soon after your return, and bids that you get some rest before resuming duties in the morning. Both he and Naruto knew that he would be leaving his clones overnight, but he obligingly inclined his head before leaving the forest. It had been quite some time since he'd returned home. Stepping inside his apartment, Naruto turned on the light. Flickering once, and then twice, it turned on, illuminating the area in a stark, fluorescent light. The first thing Naruto noticed was that someone must have recently cleaned it, for instead of the thick layers of dust he'd been expecting, it was spotless and smelled vaguely of detergent. For a split second, he wondered whether Kakashi could have had the foresight to clean it beforehand for him, but the very thought of the Jonin even picking up a mop was so ridiculous, Naruto dismissed it outright. More likely, the Hokage had gotten it cleaned in order to curry some favor or to invoke whatever feelings of nostalgia Naruto may have had for the village. Unfortunately, if such shrewd calculations had indeed been at play, they may not have been entirely off the mark. In the 3 years since he had last been there, the space seemed smaller than he remembered. He knew, however, that the only thing that had changed was himself. His apartment had always been plainly furnished, with little to no personal effects. The few items he'd once valued, his tanto, his hitayite, he'd always kept on himself. And yet, here and there, from the markings of use and wear, he could see bits of his past flash through his mind. There, that armchair that was where Kakashi had once preferred to sit in their discussions of chakra application, and there was a resultant dent in the cushion from the constant use. There, that crack in the wall by the entryway that was from all the times Rai had slammed the door open when Naruto didn't answer on the first knock. And there, in the kitchen, it was hidden away, but Naruto knew that if he opened the first drawer to the right of the sink, he would find the waxy stubs of 11 candles. In a way, it felt as though his apartment had been frozen in time, waiting for him to return. But now that he finally had, he almost felt like an intruder, as though he was not quite the Naruto the space had been waiting for. Silently, Naruto looked outside his window. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a lone dog whined. All of a sudden, a sharp knock rapped at his front door, and at the same time, memories of one of his shadow clones began to flash through his mind. He made for the door, simultaneously reviewing the information the clone had obtained. To his disappointment, there wasn't much he didn't already know, as all it confirmed was that the hidden rock was participating in the exams for less than amicable reasons. Though it was nothing the Hokage wouldn't already be fully aware of, he made a mental note to send along a messenger clone later on. The door swung open to reveal yet another familiar face. "Sasuke," said Naruto, not entirely surprised, but still taken aback. "What brings you here?" Though they had once helped the other put away his futon in Wave Country, Naruto could not for the life of him remember ever having a proper conversation with Sasuke. All he really knew about Sasuke was that he was the lone survivor of the infamous Uchiha clan, and that Kakashi seemed to hold him in high regard. For his part, Sasuke seemed rather confused himself as to what he was doing there outside of Naruto's apartment. "I had some questions regarding your journey. About what you found out there." Naruto paused, and then stepped back. "Come on in." He could have turned him away, and the faint look of surprise on Sasuke's face as he crossed over the threshold suggested that had been his expected outcome. While that may have been the case 3 years ago, after everything that had happened, the sanctity of his private quarters no longer seemed quite so important to Naruto. He couldn't even feel the entire right side of his body anymore, but Kakashi was still pushing at the boulder in a futile attempt to roll it away. "Don't, it's okay, Kakashi. I don't think I can make it," he mumbled, before coughing out blood. "Obito!" he heard Rin cry out. Something about that seemed to break Kakashi, who stopped, and fell to his knees. "Damn it! If only I'd listened to you from the start, and we'd come to save Rin, this never would have happened." His voice broke into a raw cry. "So what if I'm a captain? So what if I'm a Jonin?" Kakashi's words cut through the dense fog that had become Obito's mind, and with his last fleetingly cohesive thoughts, he made his decision. "Oh yeah, I had forgotten. I was the only one who didn't give you a gift for becoming a Jonin, Kakashi. I was wondering what to give you and I just had a thought." It was getting harder and harder for Obito to talk, but somehow, he pushed through. "I'm giving Yumi Sharingan. Whatever the village may say, Kakashi, you are a great Jonin." His lone eye visible through the mask flew open. Breathing hard, Toby sat up. It was dark in the hideout, and as his breathing evened, he could make out the dark outlines of the various sound operatives scattered throughout the cave. Near the entrance, the pair on guard duty glanced at him before returning to their game of cards. Putting some distance between himself and the hideout, Toby eventually found himself at the edge of a cliff. He exhaled, and looked up at the sky. It had been a long time since he had last seen that dream. The night was still, and the moon was full. Chapter 34, Homecoming. Ignoring the inevitable staring that followed as soon as he had entered the stadium, Naruto seated himself in the stands. He was technically there to gather information on the foreign participants, though he suspected the Hokage had just wanted to keep an eye on him. However, he couldn't complain the mission fell along the lines of his own interests, what with Amakuro detecting a Jinchuriki in the forest. It seemed this year's crop for the Chunin exams had more than its usual share of talent. The number of genin passing the second exam's criteria had exceeded expectations, and the proctors had set up a preliminary stage to trim the proverbial fat. The same thing had happened when Naruto had taken the exam. Had it really been only 4 years ago? So many things had happened since then, it almost felt like the events of a past life. Back then, he had still been under the influence of the taboo seal, and his biggest preoccupation had been on improving his standing in the eyes of the village. But now, he was here, on the other side. He sat in the stands as a part of the faceless audience that had once jeered down at him. Their spectacle was the group of genin that stood at attention at the center of the arena. Several faces immediately jumped out at Naruto first and foremost, a male Tsunade genin. He was pale, with auburn hair and black-rimmed eyes. It was a distinctive appearance that Naruto immediately recalled having glowered at him during his short time in Sunagakure. Even without seeing him fight, Naruto could tell that he was strong. Given the amount of attention he was getting from the rest of the spectators, it was clear he was a popular contender. The next face he focused on was a kunoichi from the hidden grass. She was the same censor that had pursued him in Area 44 during the second exam, and now that he looked closer, the persistent sense that she looked familiar grew even stronger. His eyes locked on her bright red hair. It wasn't every day that he saw a shade so similar to his own. Unlike the third exam, the victors of the preliminary matches will be determined on a first blood-drawn basis, said the third proctor, a chunin with a spiky ponytail. The first match will be between Temari from the Hidden Sand and Akimichi Choji from the Hidden Leaf. A blonde kunoichi yet again, another familiar face from the time when Naruto had taken the exam and the chubby genin he'd seen in the forest stepped up to the platform stage. While he hadn't stayed long enough to see the outcome of their fight against the IWA team, he supposed they must have emerged the victor. In terms of aptitude, it was an oddly balanced match. While Temari was clearly the more experienced ninja whose skills would easily have matched those of most chunin, her primarily long-range wind-release techniques were weathered without too much difficulty by her bulkier opponent. Choji, on the other hand, seemed to rely on a clumsy but powerful technique that combined his sheer mass with his chakra, turning into a ball that left a destructive crater wherever he landed. If he had actually had the speed to keep up, he would have demolished Temari in a single hit. The specific conditions of the match, however, gave one of the pair a clear advantage, a fact that she clearly realized. Abandoning her fan, which seemed to multiply the power of her techniques, but slowed them down in the process, Temari began to circle Choji, swinging her palm towards him at every opportunity, while always staying just out of his range. Each swing generated a blade of wind that propelled itself towards Choji's body, and it was a testimony to the level of her mastery over wind release that each struck with deadly precision. As Choji switched to a more defensive position, Temari picked up her offensive, and soon, it was almost as though she was dancing around him, each swing of her hands adding to an inescapable net that closed in around the leaf genin. It was a slow but calculated execution, and eventually, one blade of wind slipped through Choji's defense, slicing through his sleeve. A thin, inarguable line of red glistened on his forearm. It was the barest of cuts, and would have hardly hindered the genin. However, rules were rules, and the first blood had been drawn. "Stop!" shouted the proctor. "The winner is Temari from the Hidden Sand." His declaration was met with a polite smattering of applause from the audience. The in front of Naruto yawned. It hadn't been the most exciting match, and had ended on a technicality. Judging from the neutral expression on Temari's face, she knew it too, and she descended from the stage without celebrating her victory. However, something about her had caught Naruto's attention, and he found himself admiring her composed attitude. She knew her strengths and her limitations, and used her given constraints to her advantage. She would make a great chunin. Her face wasn't bad to look at either. From his travels with Jiraiya, Naruto had seen more than his fair share of beautiful women, but with her sharp, even features, he thought Temari left quite a lasting impression on her own terms. "Something catches your eye, Naruto?" asked Kakashi, who joined him at some point in the battle. Naruto immediately removed his scrutiny. While it was an innocent enough question, given the shrewd side-eye the Jonin was directing at him, he thought the safer bet would be to deflect the question. "Looks like there'll be a strong group of contenders this year, especially from the other villages. There's not much I can say about Konoha's showing, however. Well, there's been some buzz over the Hokage's grandson, though that may be more due to his lineage than his prowess. And he wouldn't be so quick to dismiss the others." Having said that, Kakashi offered him a mysterious smile. Following Naruto's return to the village, he had wondered how to resume his relationship with his former teacher. It seemed he needn't have worried, however, as Kakashi was clearly making a conscientious effort to maintain the amicable atmosphere of their meeting at Ichiraku. The next match will be between Ajisai of the Hidden Rain and Yamanaka Ino from the Hidden Leaf. Even before the proctor's hand had fully extended into the air, the blonde leaf genin made her move. Making a square with her hands, she directed them at her opponent, a stone-faced female. Ninpo, Shinranshin no Jutsu, Mind Destruction Technique. While Naruto had certainly heard of the Yamanaka clan, the only Yamanaka he knew in person was Menma, and he had never gotten the chance to take a close look at their famous clan techniques. The result was in equal parts instantaneous and impressive. A look of perplexity crossing the AIM genin's face, she raised her own kunai to her arm, and nicked it, drawing blood. Naruto felt his brows rising. Kakashi's smile widened through the mask. Much like the preceding match, it had been a victory determined by quick-thinking strategy rather than a show of power. However, perhaps because of the victor's local origins at the proctor's declaration of her win, the stands broke out into noticeably more enthusiastic applause. The preliminaries continued. Some matches were determined in an instant, while others were more equally matched and drawn out. Throughout, Naruto couldn't knock the sense that he was being closely watched by someone, and he quickly identified the source as the red-haired Kusujinin. The moment they made eye contact, the girl's face broke into a big smile that made Naruto blink. Unfortunately, he wasn't the only one to have noticed the unsolicited attention. "You know her, Naruto?" It seemed nothing ever escaped Kakashi when he put his mind to it. "I faced off against her during my Chunin exams in Sunigakure," said Naruto evasively. The memory had come to him shortly after first catching sight of her, though from what he recalled, nothing had passed between them that would have warranted such a warm greeting. "And that's it?" "That's it." Kakashi didn't sound convinced, though he dropped the topic. "The next match will be between Sarutobi Konohamaru from the Hidden Leaf and Haku from the Hidden Rain," called out the proctor. A young male leaf genin and a fair-skinned AIM genin of ambiguous gender headed up to the stage. The jonin who'd been dozing off in front of Naruto perked up, no doubt, an effect of the Sarutobi name. "Begin!" Crouching close to the ground, the leaf genin Konohamaru brandished a staff that became swathed in bright flames. With a defiant shout, the boy shot forward and leaped into the air, gaining momentum before bearing down on his opponent. In an effortless dodge, the AIM genin slipped past Konohamaru and returned with a barrage of directed straight at the leaf genin's exposed back. Not so easily outdone, Konohamaru twisted and spun his staff, the needles bursting into flames as they were batted away. For a moment, their respective weapons held out defensively before them. The two regarded each other warily, and then shot towards each other once more. Despite Konohamaru's obvious talent, the AIM genin called Haku wielded an agile speed that would have left the average jonin in his dust, and Naruto was surprised the battle had progressed as far as it already had. This phenomenon only started to make sense when he realized that, for some reason, Haku had yet to use any ninjutsu, and that on top of that, they weren't using their right hand. Naruto swallowed. Alarms were going off in his head as he watched the shinobi weave in and out of Konohamaru's relentless attacks. That speed and senbon-based offensive, combined with their disabled right hand, could it be? Was it the mercenary he'd encountered at Gato's hideout? Naruto had left him alive, after all, so it was well within the realms of possibility. But if that was the case, why wasn't he using his ice-release ninjutsu? Eventually, the fight between Konohamaru and Haku drew to a close when Haku's swift movements threw the younger genin off balance. Stumbling, one of them slipped through his defenses and cut his cheek. The winner, Haku from the Hidden Rain. Visibly disappointed, Konohamaru lowered his staff, and the flames faded away. "You did well, honorable grandson," shouted out the jonin in front of Naruto. Raising his head, Konohamaru returned the praise with a glum nod. However, he hadn't been the only one to look in their direction. For a moment, just as he was descending from the stage, Haku's eyes flickered up to their seats and froze. It passed in a flash, and then Haku looked away. To any other bystander, it wouldn't have raised any flags. But for Naruto, it was the final nail in the coffin. Haku knew who he was, and that could only mean he was the Hunter Nin from Wave Country. What was he doing all the way here, masquerading as an AIM genin? Was it for revenge? But there was something odd about the way Haku had been looking at them. Given that the moment had passed, it was difficult to say for sure. Rather than at Naruto, it had felt as though the shinobi had been looking at the seat beside him. Casually, Naruto glanced at Kakashi. There was no reaction there, making it a difficult situation to decipher. Before he could ponder on it further, however, the coming match would quickly overshadow its significance. The next match will be between Gaara from the Hidden Sand and Furio from the Hidden Rock. The proctor needn't have announced the next match. The moment the Suna genin stepped onto the stage and saw his opponent, the sheer wave of malevolent bloodlust he exuded swept over the stadium, stunning the entire audience into silence. Naruto felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. As for the match, it was over in a flash. One moment, the two genin were facing each other on the stage. The next, sand erupted out of the Suna genin's gourd, enveloping the other before he could react. When the sand receded, it revealed a broken corpse lying prostrate on the ground. Dark blood trickled from the agape mouth and swollen eye sockets. The stadium descended into chaos. The proctor must have realized what was happening, for he'd used a technique that extended his shadow to immobilize the Suna genin. But it was far too late. It wasn't difficult to piece together what had happened. The sand had infiltrated his opponent's body through every orifice and crushed his organs in a single blow. It was a cold-blooded murder. Ironically, it could also be considered merciful, for the genin's life had been snuffed out so instantaneously. It must have been a painless death. Several medical nin crowded the dead genin's body, as futile an effort as it was, and the third exam's proctor continued to hold Gaara in place. The genin did not fight against it. His icy cold eyes glowering out at the audience, he stood stock still. His tremendous bloodlust had abated to a steady stream, as though it was a separate entity that had been momentarily satiated. Naruto felt his heart tremor. He didn't need to summon Amakuro to confirm. He had found him, his counterpart, the other Jinchuriki, in the forest. Eventually, after an emergency meeting between the proctors, Gaara's win was declared valid, on the technicality that first blood had been drawn on the moment of his opponent's death. His name was added to the brackets for the official third exam, and the preliminaries continued. However, none of the following matches proved to be of any note for Naruto, with perhaps the lone exception of the fight between the Kusa Kunoichi and her leaf opponent, a bout from which she emerged the victor. By the end of the preliminaries, the skies were red and orange as yet another day drew to a close. Reflecting on the events of the past day, Naruto decided to take the long route home as an opportunity to stretch his legs. There were multiple things to take into consideration, most notably the hunter nin he'd fought against in Wave Country, and the Hidden Sands Jinchuriki. There were so many forces in motion, so many unknowns, and he knew it couldn't be coincidence that all of this was happening at the same time. It seemed that Naruto had returned straight into a predator's web. Here and there, with every discovery, he thought he could just barely make out the faint outline of a spinning line. Who or what was the mastermind pulling the strings? Deep in thought, before Naruto had properly realized, his lone footsteps had taken him the opposite way from his apartment. While it wasn't too late to turn back, he kept going, and soon, he found himself staring at a series of names inscribed in a stone face. Kamizuki Mayu. Hagain Rai. There was a white carnation at the base of the memorial stone. Taking care not to disturb it, Naruto sat down. He let out a slow exhale, and the numerous thoughts crowding his head faded away. These days, for Naruto, time seems to fly by in an instant. With his training, there was always something to learn, something to practice. Like clockwork, the sun rose and set without fail, the world moved without rest. But here, just here for a moment, he felt timeless. I'm home, he said at last. Chapter 35, Let's Fight! The ever-venerable Lord Third Hokage stared out from the windows of his office, mulling over the appearance of the sprawling village while nursing his smoking pipe. As was customary with the upcoming third exam, the foreign delegations would soon be arriving at the village. With the Hidden Rock participating in this year's exam, that would make 3 Kage gathered within his village's walls: himself, the Kazekage, and the Tsuchikage. As of late, communication with the Kazekage had largely been through indirect mediums. If all things went well, they would be able to redefine and clarify their alliance through this upcoming meeting. As for the Tsuchikage, what was the stubborn old Inoki hoping to gain out of this? His best intelligence operatives were on the case, but he supposed he would find out from the man himself soon enough. As for that other matter, Hiruzen turned around to face the red-haired ninja waiting behind his desk. Thank you, Naruto. Naruto's report had been thorough and informative, consisting of his observations of the foreign participants of the exams. It matched those of all his other informants, particularly when it came to the genin from the Hidden Sand. Yet, despite finding out about the other Jinchuriki, Naruto's reaction was surprisingly subdued. Quite an impressive poker face, Hiruzen thought to himself. He supposed it had always been good from the start, though where it had once seemed the side effect of a boy who did not know how to interpret his own emotions, it was now the impassive mask of a fully trained ninja. I've kept you from resting long enough, forgive me. Take the 2 weeks before the third exam to recover and settle your business. Yes, Hokage-sama. Ah, and one last thing, Naruto, I've decided to start the process to promote you as a jonin. You can expect a summons for a formal ceremony of appointment sometime next week. Yes, Hokage-sama. Will that be all? Yes. You're dismissed. In a flurry of smoke, Naruto disappeared. Hiruzen felt himself sweat. He'd saved the good news for last, and had expected a little more of a reaction than neutral acceptance. Quite an impressive poker face, he again thought to himself with a puff of his pipe. While it was a strange feeling, being in an enemy's hospital, Ajisai vastly preferred it to wasting away alone in their quarters. Out of all the AIM teams that had started the exams, the only remaining participant was Haku, and the rest had already left the village. All she was doing was staring down at Haku's sleeping face, but Ajisai could feel sweat accumulating on her palms. Even though the Lady Angel had assigned such an important mission to their team, everything was falling apart. Swearin had died, Ajisai herself had failed to get through the preliminaries, and as for Haku, there was something very wrong with her teammate. Ever since that mysterious snake-like shinobi had bit him, he had drifted in and out of varying states of lucidity. Thankfully, the situation was no longer as dire as it had been in the forest, whereupon Ajisai had to nurse him for much of the remaining time. It was by pure luck that a relatively weak team wandered into the various traps Ajisai had set up around their campsite, allowing her to snag their scroll. Just once, back in the forest when Haku had been in his most vulnerable state, Ajisai had managed to see where the snake shinobi had bit him. There, she had seen what looked like 3 black marks circling each other, a seal. As much as Ajisai had studied Fuinjutsu back in the Hidden Rain, she knew at a glance that it was far beyond her capabilities. Before losing consciousness, Haku had warned her not to allow the leaf medic Nin to examine him too closely. As much as she worried about his state, Ajisai agreed nothing good could come out of handing over any more information to their enemy than they had to. Worst came to worst, as much as she hated to burden the Lady Angel any more than she had to, Ajisai had little doubt that their savior would be able to remove the seal. The shortest passage from the Hokage's office to his apartment took Naruto through the market, and as always, a flurry of whispering followed wherever he went. In the past, he had used the transformation technique to avoid their stares, but this time, he gave himself up to their scrutiny. Jonin. The rank that had once been Naruto's goal was now finally within his grasp. Jonin. Naruto tasted the word in his mouth, but it was the same as his initial reaction. He felt nothing. It meant that he would be given missions of higher difficulty, and that he had the option of going solo. It also meant, if the Hokage so chose, that he was eligible to be assigned a genin team of his own to train. To anyone else, the rank represented responsibility and recognition. To Naruto, it was an empty word that rang hollowly in his ears. So hollowly, it almost worried him. When he reached his apartment, he immediately noticed 2 things. 1. Someone had raided his desk and stolen his copy of Jiraiya's latest book. And 2. There was a note waiting for him on his kitchen table. If you want your book back, meet me at Area 15. It took about a half-day's journey by foot past the gates of Konohagakure before Jiraiya was finally unable to sense any scouts within his immediate perimeter. The village had beefed up security in preparation for the Chunin exams, particularly along their shared borders with grass and sound territory, and for good reason, what with the constant flow of foreign ninja passing through fire country. Within the first few kilometers radius of their village, a rabbit couldn't nibble on a leaf without the intelligence division knowing about it. Jiraiya, however, was not a rabbit, and it was a simple matter to shake off any eyes that may have followed him from the village, no doubt, under the orders of Danzo. He really hated that man. If Jiraiya had his way, Danzo would have been ousted from his position of power years ago. Unfortunately, the Lord Third had always had a soft spot for his old comrade, believing wholeheartedly that everything Danzo did was for the sake of the village. In Jiraiya's private thoughts, it was a misguided opinion, and it was only out of complete respect for his former teacher that he did not voice them publicly. As always, the message from the shadow was waiting for Jiraiya in the promised location, a scroll, nestled in a tree hollow. It wasn't very long, they never were, but the word seized Jiraiya's heart in a tight grip of apprehension. Another pillar crumbles under the weight of the rising sun. The lone leaf, caught in the eye of the storm. Jiraiya swallowed the scroll as soon as he'd committed the words to memory, and it settled in his stomach as a cold, hard lump. In the years since Jiraiya had stumbled across the shadow, or rather, the shadow had found him, he never before received such an ominous message. The rising sun could only mean Akatsuki, a group named to mean daybreak, and if his interpretation was correct, the crumbling pillar represented most likely, given the imagery, one under the jurisdiction of the hidden rock, making it the fourth to fall into the hands of the criminal organization. No doubt, that had something to do with the village's participation in the Leaf's Chunin exams. As for the latter sentence, it was clearly a warning, one that Jiraiya was already well aware of. An impending disaster was rapidly approaching the Hidden Leaf, and when it came down to it, the village would be friendless. Inevitably, Jiraiya's thoughts turned toward the shadow. That was what he called his informant in his mind, for they had never revealed their identity. And while any attempts at elucidating their identity had led to a dead end, their information until now had always proven accurate. Given the level of confidentiality of the information, they had to be a powerful ninja intimately connected to Akatsuki, and it had to be someone who prioritized their loyalty to the Hidden Leaf over their own life. By the foot of a nearby tree, the grass rustled. Jiraiya watched a harmless green snake slither by, carving its passage through the dirt before disappearing underground. Of course, deep inside, Jiraiya had his own suspicions of who it could be. But he had been disappointed one too many times beforehand to get his hopes up. It didn't take long for Naruto to find the culprit behind the note. It was a masked jonin sitting on the branches of a large tree in the middle of an otherwise empty field, giggling to himself from behind the pages of an Ika book. The book was the newest addition to the franchise, a first edition hot off the press. Autographing it with a flourish, Jiraiya had pressed it into Naruto's hands, claiming that it was his reward for his diligence as a pupil over the years, never mind the fact that Naruto was still underage. If you wanted to read it that badly, you could have just asked, Naruto called up to the jonin. Having been completely absorbed in the book's contents, Kakashi almost looked surprised to see Naruto. Ah, Naruto. I could have asked, but where's the fun in that? Closing the book, Kakashi jumped down to the ground. Ambling over, he clapped Naruto by the shoulder. I heard from the Lord Third that you're going to be made a jonin. Congratulations. Thank you, Kakashi-sensei. His gaze lowering, Kakashi smiled faintly. Mayu and Rai would have been very proud of you. Yes, I suppose, Naruto replied, inclining his head. How have you been settling in? I've been keeping busy, under the orders of Hokage-sama. Though the genin from the hidden sand has been lying low, so it's been mostly quiet. I see. That must be quite the nightmare for those in charge. Despite the consolatory words, Kakashi's tone sounded alarmingly cheerful, an afterglow of Jiraiya's books, perhaps. Anyways, your promotion merits some kind of celebration, don't you think? Kakashi tucked the book carefully away into his flak jacket. Are you ready for our rematch? At last, Naruto felt a smile creep to his face as well. The last time Naruto had truly faced off against Kakashi had been the day of their belt test. While Naruto had managed to snag a belt for their team then, it had been a match between a teacher and his pupils, meant to gauge their teamwork rather than test their battle prowess. That was no longer the case. They were no longer in forested terrain, a training ground meant to teach a genin how to utilize his surroundings. They faced each other on an open field as equals, the wind whipping through the grass at their feet. The winner will be whoever remains standing, said Naruto. He had zero intentions of holding back. With his imminent appointment to Jonin and Kakashi having his own team to handle, who knew when he'd next get a chance to properly measure his progress against Kakashi? Kakashi accepted his proposal with an easy smile. We'll still go out for ramen after this, I assume? There won't be any lingering hard feelings? Sure, if you can still stomach anything by the end of it, Naruto retorted. There was an opening pause, as each sized the other up. The few times he'd seen Kakashi fight seriously, the Jonin had always been a terrifying sight to behold. On top of his prodigious base speed and taijutsu, his use of the Sharingan granted him mastery over at least 4 basic nature transformations, giving him a leg up over Naruto, who had mainly focused on honing his lightning and wind. No, the key to success would not be through superior technique. When it came to Kakashi, Naruto's best strategy would be to take advantage of where he had an edge, and simply overpower him. The seconds ticked by and Naruto struck first. The sound of metal against metal rang harshly through the air as Naruto's tanto met Kakashi's kunai. Their blades shook, either of them giving ground when Naruto's tanto suddenly pushed forward as Kakashi leapt back into the air. Katan, Gokaki no Jutsu, Fire Release, Fireball Technique. Naruto flipped back just as a roaring fireball slammed into the ground where he had been standing, its heat warming his face as his hands blurred into action midair. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Technique. In a smoking cloud, 4 of his clones appeared beside him. Evading another fireball that seared the ground by their feet, one took advantage of the smoke cover to disappear while the remaining 3 shot forward, convening on the Jonin from all directions. Countering one clone's Tanto with a kunai, Kakashi spun and kicked aside another clone. The third clone plunged its Tanto into Kakashi's chest, and with a burst of smoke, the Jonin disappeared, leaving just Naruto and his clones. Naruto quickly scanned the area, feeling the ground beneath them tremor. He leaped away just as a pair of hands broke through the earth, latching onto one of his clone's feet. His clone self yelped as he was dragged down into the ground, before dissipating. Kakashi broke through to the surface and blocked Naruto's sweeping kick before flipping over his head and retaliating with a series of precisely aimed blows. Lightning crackled. Kakashi's hands seemed to slow down in midair for Naruto. Weaving between them, he thrust the hilt of his Tanto into Kakashi's chest. At the last instant, in a true testimony to the speed of his reflexes, Kakashi veered back, but Naruto's Tanto glanced across his sternum, and the force of the blow blew the Jonin back, leaving gashes through the ground. His remaining clones weren't idle, choosing then to rush at Kakashi. The Jonin stomped the ground, and a block of rock erupted out, ramming into a clone that disappeared. The remaining 2 ran across the walls of the block, before tackling Kakashi, who promptly dissipated. This time, however, it wasn't just an ordinary shadow clone. Instead, it sent out a spark of blinding lightning that promptly sent a shock of 1,000,000 volts running through Naruto's clones. They promptly disappeared, and their combined experiences of being hit by lightning struck Naruto like a sledgehammer. It seemed that Kakashi had used the diversion of the block to instantaneously replace himself with a lightning clone. Naruto had to hand it to his former teacher. It was a move mixing both defensive and offensive strategy that would have debilitated most other ninja. Of course, it was painful, but Naruto had suffered through much worse. The lightning faded, leaving black steam sizzling off of Naruto, who nonetheless remained standing, to Kakashi's blatant surprise. Jiraiya-sama really put you through the ringer in your training, didn't he? Kakashi replied wryly. Despite their soon-to-be equal standing, it seemed Kakashi was finding it rather hard to let go of his teacher mentality. The way he was holding back in the match made it apparent that rather than trying to win, he was trying to draw out and evaluate everything Naruto had learned over the years. Well, Naruto was more than happy to show him some of the results of his training. A spinning ball of churning chakra appeared in each of Naruto's hands. You're going to have to get a little more serious, Kakashi-sensei. Reaching up with a hand, Kakashi raised his 8 to reveal a red eye with a spinning tomo. I could say the same to you, Naruto. It didn't take long for Karen's teammates to fall asleep. The sedative she'd sprinkled in their plates just before the meal was her own homegrown concoction, grinded down from the roots of a plant native to their country. In small doses, it sufficed as a painkiller for the bite marks on her arms. The amount she'd used was enough to knock out a large mammal, an apt descriptor for her constantly eating teammate. While she wouldn't have dared to pull something like this back in grass country, where she was almost constantly under strict supervision, when they were all the way out here in foreign territory, she had a little more leeway. Now, with the 2 snoring into their rice bowls, Karen was free to pursue her own agenda without any fear of retaliation. Closing her eyes, she focused, and in an instant, she found him. To her disappointment, he wasn't alone. It looked as though he was fighting against another vibrant chakra signature, but there was no killing intent in either of the 2. A sparring match, then. The day was warm and sunny. There was barely a cloud in the sky as Karen crossed the village, leaping across the rooftops in her haste. Despite the heavy security she'd sensed spread throughout the village, or perhaps as a result of it, the civilians passing below her feet seemed to be enjoying their daily mundane lives. Several of them noticed her running by, and then returned to their business without a second glance. It made a stark difference from Kusagakure. Though they were technically in peacetime, given its near vicinity with multiple other countries, they were always having border disputes. There was never a day when the medical tents weren't overflowing with the wounded, a military effort that drained their civilians of their entire livelihoods, leaving them embittered and driven by self-interest. These people don't know how good they have it, Karen thought wistfully. 4 wind-release Rasengan barrages later, Kakashi had somehow managed to emerge with just the single purpling bruise on his chest and a sheen of sweat on his brow. But there was not even a single moment to rest, as more of Naruto's clones threw themselves at him. He was pretty sure the real Naruto was somewhere nearby plotting something nasty, no doubt. Unfortunately, with his clones constantly on the offensive, Kakashi couldn't afford even a single opening in his defense without the risk of being obliterated by a souped-up Rasengan. Naruto had been strong enough to be considered for a Jonin appointment even before he'd left on the mission to Wave Country. However, now, after several years under Jiraiya's tutelage, it seemed he'd returned with a much more efficient and polished skill set, attacking with a punishing pace meant to wear down any opponent. Given Naruto's massive chakra reserves, with a good strategy, he'd be able to outlast almost anyone. But this wasn't the extent of it. If it had been anyone else, Kakashi would have accepted these improvements as a fine result of their years of training. Because it was Naruto, however, Kakashi knew there was something still up his sleeve. As for whether he would be able to draw it out of him, well, Kakashi had joked about the student surpassing the teacher, but now, he was starting to feel like it wasn't so funny after all. His chakra reserves were starting to run low. If Kakashi wanted to emerge from this without losing face, he'd have to end it here and now. Another Naruto clone leaped at him, dodging the kick. Kakashi grabbed the clone by the arm and threw it at another clone. As the clones momentarily fell back, Kakashi concentrated lightning chakra into his hand, and the sound of 1,000 chirping birds filled the air. He shot towards the clones, the ground breaking at his feet with every step. His Chidori ripped through the clones at such a speed that they all burst into nothingness in the same instant. Where was Naruto? There. By the tree. His eyes were closed. Was he seriously sleeping? No. He was. Meditating? It was too late to turn back now. Kakashi's Chidori was already bearing down on Naruto. Was it a clone? Suddenly, Naruto vanished. A looming metal gate in the darkness, locked by a single seal. A lurking demon just beyond it, waiting for its one chance to break free. Naruto was almost starting to get used to the sight. You again, snarled the Nine-Tails. What do you want now? What I always want, said Naruto. Stop getting in the way of my chakra. The Nine-Tails let out a guttural laugh that echoed through the darkness. Your chakra, you say I have prowled this world, free, for a millennia, but my chakra has been flowing through you since the moment your flimsy existence was conceived. You have known me for the entire length of your short, miserable life, but for me, this is merely a temporary jail. And when I break free, I will claim what is mine. Naruto didn't reply. This wasn't the first time the Nine-Tails had gone off on him. However, he knew they weren't empty threats. Thanks to Jiraiya, he knew that the 8 trigram seal used to seal the Nine-Tails within him was growing weaker over time. In fact, the more Naruto used the demon's chakra, the weaker the seal would grow, and the more easily it would be able to take control of his body. Jiraiya had also introduced the toad with the key to his seal to Naruto in the midst of their basic lesson. Minato knew that the seal would weaken over time, and he entrusted the key to me to strengthen the seal when the time came. Jiraiya paused, and looked up from the flickering campfire. But Naruto, from the way this seal was set up, I believe he intended for you to be able to use the Nine-Tails chakra. If you want, I can use this key to weaken the seal instead, and help you start utilizing its power. No, Naruto replied flatly. I won't rely on a power that I can't completely control. Isn't there a seal that will completely block the Nine-Tails from taking over my body, but let me use its chakra? Wearing a thoughtful look, Jiraiya stroked his chin. The tailed beasts aren't just chakra pumps, Naruto. While they aren't exactly living beings, they have individual personalities that cannot be suppressed. The seal used on you is one of the strongest seals I know of, but the most important thing I learned in my own Fuinjutsu studies in Whirlpool Country is that if there's a will, there is always a way. Jiraiya lowered his hand and gave Naruto an appraising stare. How is your sage training going? Naruto opened his eyes. The first clone he had sent out in the midst of his fight with Kakashi was finally ready. Given Naruto's contract with a fox, gathering natural energy always took longer in the daytime, in the absence of moonlight. But with a clone hidden away to gather energy while he distracted his opponent, it was more than feasible. His clone disappeared just before Kakashi's Chidori ripped it apart, and Naruto felt the natural energy immediately filling his body, waking up senses he hadn't even realized he'd been missing. Suddenly, he knew exactly how many blades of grass remained in the field. He could sense the Hokage pacing in his office all the way on the other side of the village, the Aim Hunter Nin lying in a hospital bed, the Suna Genin lurking in the foreigner's quarters, and the Kusajinin was getting alarmingly close. The balance wasn't perfect, what with the Ninetales chakra acting as a constant interference, like a giant boulder blocking a river. Nor would it last long, there was only enough energy to last him a few seconds at best. But it would have to be enough. Sorry, Kakashi-sensei, he thought. I'm going to need you to get a little more serious. The Naruto that had vanished had been a clone. Kakashi swung around immediately, searching for Naruto's chakra signature, and he found it. Kakashi's eyes widened. Naruto must have been hidden underground, for he erupted out now, directly before Kakashi. It was oddly reminiscent of their first fight during the bell test, when Naruto had leaped out of a hole in the ground to grab a bell off of Kakashi. But that wasn't what took him by surprise, no, it was Naruto's chakra itself. Where it had been enormous before, it was now colossal, churning as though it yearned to break free of its vessel. What was more, Naruto's appearance had changed. His eyes were red, almost ferally so, and his hair had grown longer and shaggier in a way that fleetingly reminded him of the boy's parents. Had the Ninetales taken control again? But no, this felt different from before. Somehow, Naruto was in perfect control. All of this ran through Kakashi's head in the split second that he glimpsed Naruto shooting towards him. The next instant, he felt Naruto's foot collide into his chest, precisely where he'd previously struck with his hilt. Something audibly cracked, and he flew back, tumbling through the dirt and grass. Grimacing, before he lost complete control, Kakashi plunged his kunai into the ground to forcibly stop himself, the momentum nearly ripping the skin off his hands. When his body finally skidded to a stop, he let go of the kunai. Letting his hand drop to his side, he exhaled. His ribs hurt. He'd definitely fractured something. Soon, he heard Naruto's steps approach him. That was a little much on an old man like me, Kakashi grumbled. That's what happens when you hold back, came Naruto's dry voice. A thought struck him, and Kakashi checked his chest pocket. To his relief, the novel he tucked away was miraculously still in one piece. As Naruto's imperfect sage mode faded away, he could feel the influence on his body disappearing as well. His clawed appendages reverted to fingers and toes, and his hair shrank to its normal cropped length. As the energy seeped back into his surroundings, he could feel a dull sense of tiredness settling over him, rather like he was coming down from a severe adrenaline rush. He looked around at the field, or at least, what remained of it. While Area 15 had once been a level plain, it now more closely resembled a minefield. Wincing, Kakashi stood up, brushing the dirt off his legs. Well, Naruto, we've got a lot left to discuss, it seems. Before that, Sensei, there's someone I need to talk to, said Naruto, turning to look towards the edge of the field. The girl from the hidden grass was waiting there. Even if Naruto hadn't sensed her coming, her spiky red hair made her a difficult sight to miss. At that moment, she appeared to be staring at him in a shell-shocked sort of way. Kakashi did a double take. And then, he shook his head. It's like I don't even know you anymore, Naruto. Naruto felt himself sweat. It's not what you think it is. Of course, said Kakashi lightly. Well, I have to drop by the hospital to get my ribs checked out anyways. Let's get dinner some other time, go enjoy your date. Making an ironic salute with his fingers towards Naruto, the Jonin limped resolutely away in the opposite direction. Naruto followed his progress for a few seconds before turning back to the matter at hand. The genin Karen, was it? Had been trailing him before, in the forest of death, and had offered up a smile during the preliminaries. And now, she'd even tracked him down to this remote training field. What did she want from him? Did she have any compromising information on him? In the short time that Naruto had interacted with Karen at the exams, she'd seemed to be a fairly proficient and put-together kunoichi. Now, for some reason, she looked bashful as she approached him. Uzumaki Naruto, do you remember me? She asked, her eyes darting up to his face, before looking down. This odd indecision between his face and her shoes continued to repeat itself. We fought in the Chunin exams in Sunagakure, Naruto replied. Is there a reason you've been following me? Karen's face lit up. So you do remember me. I'm so glad. I just wanted to know, she squirmed. If you have a girlfriend. Naruto blinked. Is that all you wanted to know? He asked. Karen nodded furiously. Without responding, Naruto began to walk away. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to flirt with him. Ever since his growth spurt, he noticed a dramatic increase in interest from the girls within his vicinity. More than a few times, they turned out to be a kunoichi bent on getting information out of him and Jiraiya, and unlike the latter, who somehow always fell for their advances, Naruto had long since learned to tune them out. "Wait, I wanted to thank you," shouted Karen from behind him. "For the fish you left behind." Despite himself, Naruto stopped and turned around. "What do you mean?" This time, Karen looked straight into his face. "In grass country I was starving, and you left behind one of the fish for me from the river. It saved me. Thank you?" Grass country fish a basket. A vague recollection replayed itself in Naruto's mind. That had been her? He'd caught a glimpse of her retreating, and thought it had been a civilian down on their luck. How had a kunoichi as capable as her ended up in such a sorry state? "You're welcome," he said at last. "I'm so glad you grew up hot," added Karen, a bead of drool dangling from the side of her mouth. Women are all the same, Naruto thought to himself, and walked away. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did putting this epic what if together. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single twist in the story. Drop your thoughts, theories, or even wild ideas in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you're craving more awesome Naruto content, go check out the other videos on the channel. I've got plenty of heat waiting for you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even a shadow clone needs love. Peace out.